Tonight we gather at the quiet edge of memory, where the soft glow of a single flame can guide us through shadows we have long carried in silence. Tonight's story begins with a simple candle, but each flicker holds the weight of a name, a friendship, and a promise never forgotten. As the wick brightens the darkness, it reveals a path lined with stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and the gentle kind of love that survives even the coldest nights. And somewhere along this winding path, a question waits for you. How many candles do we carry inside our hearts without ever lighting them? Before we begin this slow journey, I want to gently invite you, whether you're listening from the United States, drifting into the late hours of Europe, settling into the quiet chill of a Canadian evening, or watching from anywhere else in the world, to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what time you're listening tonight. Are you here at midnight, early morning, somewhere in between? Your presence shapes this space, and this space is made for you. Now, take a slow breath. Adjust your pillow. Let your body sink a little deeper into rest. Let the room around you dim, soften, and fade. The story will walk gently beside you, asking nothing except that you listen with an open heart. And when you're ready, we will begin. The old village sat at the foot of a mist-veiled valley where dawn rarely arrived all at once, but instead unraveled itself in long, gentle ribbons of pale gold. In the very heart of this quiet place stood a modest wooden house with a roof that bowed as if in deep, permanent respect to the passing years. This house belonged to Marin, the last keeper of the village candles, a role passed down through generations like a secret prayer. Every morning, Marin awoke before the sun even considered rising. She would sit beside her small window, listening to the faint rustle of wind against the wooden frames. The air in her home always smelled faintly of beeswax, lavender, and the lingering warmth of extinguished flames. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each shelf filled with rows of candles, some tall and slender, others short and stout, some wrapped in soft fabric, others carved with delicate markings that told stories, all on their own. One candle, placed at the very center of the room on a wooden pedestal, had never been lit, not once in all the years Marin had lived there. It was wrapped in deep cobalt cloth and tied with a frayed silver string. Marin touched it every morning, tracing the grooves carved into its sides, but she never untied the knot. Not yet. The village folk often whispered about her, quietly, respectfully. They said she carried too many memories for one heart, that her eyes held the weight of things she would never speak aloud. Yet when they visited her home, seeking candles for ceremonies, farewells, or blessings, she greeted each one of them with a soft smile, her voice steady like a warm hand placed gently on a weary shoulder. On this particular morning, as Marin prepared her work table and trimmed the wicks of newly shaped candles, the mist outside curled itself against the door as though urging her to step beyond the threshold. She paused, sensing an unfamiliar shift, subtle but undeniable. It was the kind of feeling that arrived before a storm, or before a long-buried story decided to rise from silence. She closed her eyes, let her breath settle, and in that stillness she felt it, a memory calling her name, a name she had not allowed herself to answer in many years. Slowly, Marin opened her eyes and turned toward the cobalt-wrapped candle, its presence suddenly heavier than the rest. Something, she realized, was beginning, something she could no longer postpone. Marin stood perfectly still, listening to the hush of her small home, as though the walls themselves were waiting. The morning mist pressed softly against the window panes, turning the outside world into a pale blur. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, a faded wool piece that once belonged to someone she used to walk beside, and stepped toward the front door with quiet, measured breaths. When she opened it, a cool draft swept in, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The village was barely awake. Only the distant sound of a rooster broke the silence. But there, lying on the wooden doorstep like a forgotten whisper, was a folded piece of parchment sealed with crimson wax. Marin's heart hesitated just for a beat. Letters rarely came to this valley, and when they did, they were almost always for someone else. She knelt slowly, her fingers brushing away a thin layer of moisture beating on the parchment's surface. The seal was unfamiliar, no family crest, no mark of the council, no symbol of trade or travel, just a single impression, a small candle flame, a sign meant only for her. She held the letter for a long moment before lifting it, the parchment warm despite the morning chill. As she stepped back inside, she lit a tiny lamp on the table, letting its amber glow reveal the letter's texture, the faint strokes of handwriting beneath the fold. The flame flickered, as though nervous, as though it too sensed what this letter might contain. With steady but cautious hands, Marin broke the seal. Inside was a short message written in elegant but trembling script, ink that faded in some places, as if the writer paused often or struggled to continue. For every friend we lose, a story remains unspoken. I am coming to light the candle we left behind. L. The world around her seemed to still. The lamp's flame quieted. The air settled. L. A single initial, yet enough to send a tremor through every memory Marin had long pressed into silence. She felt that familiar ache, the blend of warmth and sorrow reserved only for someone once cherished deeply, someone she once believed she would grow old alongside, someone she thought she had lost forever. Her fingers curled gently around the parchment, holding it as if holding the hand of a ghost. She looked toward the cobalt-wrapped candle across the room, its untouched wick waiting patiently in the shadows. So, the time had come. The story she had spent years avoiding was making its way back to her doorstep. And soon she would have to open a chapter she had never dared to read again. Outside, the mist thickened, swirling gently as though carrying footsteps, yet unheard. Marin closed her eyes, whispering to the quiet air. Then, I suppose, I must prepare. The letter rested on Marin's table like a heartbeat, small, steady, impossible to ignore. The morning slowly stretched itself across the valley, its muted light slipping between the wooden slats of her shutters, touching the shelves of candles that lined the room. The soft glow caught the edges of the wax, turning each candle into a quiet witness to her unfolding thoughts. Marin stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped loosely around herself. She could feel the tug of the past settling into her bones, a subtle ache that had lived with her so long she'd almost mistaken it for something natural. But today, the presence of that single initial, that fragile promise written in trembling ink, stirred something she had kept locked away. With slow, deliberate steps, she moved toward the shelves. Her fingers hovered over each candle, her touch light, respectful. Every candle here belonged to someone. Each one represented a life that had crossed her path, a friend who had walked beside her, a story that had shaped her. Some candles were tall, symbols of long, fulfilled journeys. Others were shorter, carved with symbols representing struggles endured. And a few had tiny imperfections, little dips or marks where the wax had cooled unevenly. much like the uneven way people live and leave. The room was silent save for the faint creak of wooden floorboards beneath her feet. But to Marin the silence was never empty. It was full of laughter that once echoed here, tears that fell quietly in corners, promises exchanged under moonlight, and goodbyes whispered when the candles were lit one final time. Her hand paused over a small, amber-colored candle shaped like a teardrop, one she had made for Arlo, the boy who had always insisted he wasn't afraid of the dark, even though she knew better. Next to it stood a tall forest green candle carved with leaves that represented Iran, the gentle-hearted herbalist who had taught her the art of healing. Further along was a pale blue candle shaped like a spiral made for Mina, who had loved the sound of river currents and believed that every life flowed in circles. Marin touched each one, breathing deeply, letting herself remember. These memories, once too heavy to carry openly, now soothed her like familiar songs. Each flicker of memory steadied her heart, reminding her she had lived through loss before and survived with grace. But none of these candles carried the weight of the one wrapped in cobalt cloth, the one she had promised to light only when the time was right. And the time, it seemed, was approaching. She turned toward it now, her breath catching slightly as she approached. The candle stood alone, centered on a wooden pedestal, as though holding a place of honor. The cloth wrapping it hid the intricate carving she remembered carving with L so many years ago, two sets of hands shaping a single candle, laughing when wax dripped onto their fingers, whispering quiet vows of friendship that felt unbreakable. Her fingertips brushed the cloth, soft, cool, familiar. She did not remove it, not yet. Instead, she whispered to the candle, "It seems you'll see the light sooner than I expected." The candle, of course, did not answer, but a gentle stillness settled around it, as if acknowledging her words. Marin straightened, drawing strength from the steady presence of the candles around her. She knew she had much to prepare, emotionally, practically, spiritually. If El was truly coming, old wounds would open, old joys might resurface, and old stories would finally demand to be told. The mist beyond her window began to thin, revealing the soft outline of the village. Life would soon stir, children running through the square, vendors calling out morning greetings, neighbors exchanging warm smiles. And Marin would step back into that rhythm, carrying her quiet secret and the knowledge that everything was about to change. She took one last look at the cobalt-wrapped candle before turning away. The room of silent flames felt warmer now, as though sensing the story that was ready to unfold. Marin stepped outside, letting the door close gently behind her as the morning mist began its slow retreat. The air held a coolness that clung to her skin, carrying the scent of wet leaves, distant wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of pine resin. The village was beginning to stir, soft footfalls on cobblestone paths, the rhythmic thump of someone chopping wood, a cartwheel creaking somewhere beyond the square. She stood at the threshold for a moment, breathing in the world she had known her entire life. Yet today, something felt different. There was a subtle shift in the air, like a distant echo calling her name from a place she could not yet see. She followed the pull of it, stepping onto the narrow path that led down from her home toward the heart of the village. As she walked, her boots brushed against morning dew, scattering silver droplets that clung to the hem of her skirt. Birds perched on the low branches above her began their soft, hesitant calls, notes that sounded more like questions than songs. The forest edge beyond the village loomed peaceful and quiet, its shadows resting gently against the early light. Marin's gaze drifted to the old stone bridge, that arched over the small creek running through the valley. It was there that she and Elle had once carved their initials into the underside of a wooden plank, believing the creek would carry their promise downstream to keep it safe. She hadn't visited that spot in many years, not because she feared it, but because some memories were so precious they felt fragile, like glass that might crack under too much light. She continued past the bridge, heading toward the market where townsfolk were setting out crates of vegetables, jars of honey, bundles of dried herbs. The warm aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery, inviting and familiar. Children darted between the market stalls, their laughter echoing softly as they chased one another through the square. Everywhere Marin looked, she saw small reminders of the years that had shaped her. The elderly woman who taught her how to weave basket handles, the blacksmith who once repaired her father's lantern, the carpenter who helped build the shelves for her candle room. These people were threads in the tapestry of her life, woven tightly and tenderly, but today her mind wandered somewhere else, toward the letter waiting on her table, toward the promise of a reunion she wasn't sure she was ready for. She felt the gentle tug again, like a hand brushing against her sleeve, urging her to listen. Marin paused near the well in the center of the square. The water inside was calm, reflecting a soft shimmer of morning light. She leaned over it, letting her reflection ripple subtly with the movement of her breath. Her face looked the same as always, kind-weathered, thoughtful, yet today her eyes carried a flicker she had not seen in a long time, a flicker of anticipation and a trace of fear. A quiet voice drifted across the square, pulling her from her thoughts. "Good morning, Marin." She turned to see old Terran, the beekeeper, waving with a honey-stained cloth in his hand. His gray beard glimmered with the last of the dew, and his smile was warm, as though he could sense the weight she carried, but would never ask her to name it. "Morning, Terran," she replied softly. "You're out earlier than usual," he observed. Marin simply nodded. "Just listening," Terran chuckled. "Ah, the world has a great deal to say when we let it." She smiled faintly at that. If only he knew how true those words were today. After exchanging a few gentle pleasantries, Marin continued along the path that skirted the edge of the village. She walked until the chatter of the market softened behind her, and only the quiet rustle of the forest remained. There was a place she needed to visit, a place she hadn't dared to return to in years. And though she didn't fully understand why, she felt that the forest itself was urging her onward, as if it held a whisper meant only for her. So she stepped beneath the canopy of leaves, into the cool embrace of the shaded path, and followed the whisper trail that had called her since morning. The forest welcomed Marin with the hush of an old friend, quiet, knowing, and full of memories she had once breathed into its branches. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft, uneven patches, painting the ground with shifting patterns of gold and green. The air here was different from the open valley, cooler, steadier, carrying the faint scent of moss and damp bark. Each step she took along the narrow path stirred leaves that had long since surrendered to the forest floor. Their delicate crunch echoed softly, a reminder that time had passed, even if the trees still stood exactly where she left them. She brushed her fingertips along the trunks as she walked, feeling the rough textures that had changed little over the years. These trees had once heard her laughter, her whispered secrets, her promises to Elle under rising moons. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to shift around her. The breeze grew gentler, the silence more profound. and soon she reached the place where the path curved into a small clearing, one she could have found blindfolded. Here the trees grew in a loose circle, their branches intertwining above like hands joined in silent prayer. This was where she and Elle had spent countless evenings talking about dreams, futures, and fears they were too young to name. At the center of the clearing stood a weathered stump, its surface carved with shallow markings nearly hidden beneath patches of moss. Marin knelt beside it, brushing the green away with slow, reverent strokes. The familiar carvings emerged, two small initials intertwined, M and L. Even after all these years, the sight of those letters brought a warmth that reached all the way to her ribs, and with it, a sorrow that softened rather than stung. She rested her palm against the carving, letting the memory settle gently within her. They had once promised one another they would return here every year during the first week of frost, no matter how far life carried them. But life, she had learned, was a shifting path. It pulled some people closer while pushing others impossibly far away. She had kept the memory alive in her heart, but Elle had vanished like a candle flame in a storm. A soft breeze passed through the clearing, lifting a few strands of her hair. She closed her eyes as the wind carried with it a faint sound, a distant rustling, almost like footsteps, slow, hesitant, familiar. Marin opened her eyes and stood scanning the shadows between the trees. No one was there, yet she felt the presence all the same. It reminded her of the nights when Elle would arrive silently behind her, always able to find her without being seen. A habit born from years of shared wandering, a comfort she had forgotten she missed. She walked slowly around the clearing, brushing her fingertips against low-hanging branches, letting the forest speak in its gentle, wordless way. A memory rose in her mind, Elle teaching her how to read the patterns of moss on stones, how to listen for the difference between wind and footsteps, how to sense the shift in the forest when someone she cared about was near. Marin paused. Kneeling by a patch of soft earth near the stump, she saw a faint imprint, something recent, a boot mark, small enough to be overlooked, deep enough to suggest someone had stood there not long ago. Her heart tightened, not with fear, but with something more delicate, hope. The imprint pointed toward the northern path, the one that led deeper into the woods, where the land sloped toward the riverbank. She studied the ground carefully, two more faint impressions, a trail barely visible but undeniably present. Someone had been here, someone who knew this place, someone who might have carved there half of those initials long ago. Marin exhaled slowly, allowing the realization to settle, gentle and undeniable. Elle was close, not just in memory, but in step, in breath, in the forgotten paths of the forest. The clearing around her seemed to brighten, as though the very air recognized the truth before she fully did. She pressed her hand once more to the carved initials, whispering, "I'm ready to hear the story you're bringing back to me." With that, she followed the faint trail toward the river, the whisper of the forest guiding her forward into whatever waited next. The forest path narrowed as Marin followed the faint impressions in the earth, the whisper of leaves above her, forming a quiet canopy of sound. The deeper she traveled, the more the air shifted, cooler, touched by the damp breath of moving water. She could feel the presence of the river before she heard it, the way the earth grew softer beneath her boots, the way the scent of moss thickened. Soon the murmur of flowing water reached her ears, soft at first, then unfolding into a steady, soothing rhythm. It was the same river that had wound through her childhood, a ribbon of silver that shimmered beneath moonlight and carried fallen leaves downstream like tiny vessels of memory. She had walked beside it countless times with Elle, skipping stones, whispering secrets, imagining futures shaped by dreams too large to hold. When she stepped into the clearing, the river appeared before her, just as she remembered, broad and calm, its surface shimmering under the morning light. Small ripples lapped against smooth stones along the bank, their soft taps echoing like distant footsteps. Marin paused, letting the sound settle inside her chest. She approached the water's edge, kneeling beside a stone polished by years of passing currents. Her reflection wavered upon the surface, gentle, blurred, softened by the river's endless motion. The water was cold when she dipped her fingers into it, sending small circles outward, each one rippling toward the opposite bank. It was here, many years ago, that she and Elle had crafted the candle now wrapped in cobalt cloth. They had melted wax in a small tin pot over a makeshift fire, laughing when the wind blew smoke into their faces. They carved symbols into the candle with the point of a small knife, symbols that held meanings only they understood: a star for guidance, a river for change, a spiral for return, always for return. She closed her eyes, feeling the memory as if it were happening again. Elle's voice soft beside her, their hands working in quiet harmony, the river murmuring like an old storyteller who had seen too many seasons to be surprised by any of them. Opening her eyes, she scanned the riverbank, and there, half hidden among the grass, she saw it. A footprint. Not faint this time, fresh. The edges were still crisp, the soil pressed firmly inward. Someone had stood here recently, perhaps only an hour or less before she arrived. The size was familiar, a little longer than her own boot, narrower at the heel, with a distinct tilt she remembered from the way Elle walked. Her breath caught softly. She followed the next footprint, then the next. They led along the riverbank, not toward the village, but deeper into the woods, toward the place where the river narrowed into a gentle bend. A place they once called the Listening Curve, because you could hear the water's whisper echo between the rocks. Marin walked carefully, her heart beating in a rhythm that matched the flow of the river. Along the way, she noticed small signs. A broken twig here, disturbed moss there. Subtle traces of someone moving quietly, someone who did not want to be found too easily, but had not fully erased their presence. At the curve, where the river narrowed into a glassy channel, she found something else, a small stone set deliberately atop a larger rock. It was smooth, dark, and etched with a shallow line across its center, a mark she recognized, a sign used only between her and Elle. I was here. Marin lifted the stone gently, holding it between her palms. Warmth pulsed through her chest, not from the stone but from the simple, undeniable truth. Elle was not simply returning. Elle had already begun reaching out. She gazed at the quiet curve of the river, listening to the water's steady rhythm, a rhythm that had carried their childhood, their friendship, their promises, long after they stopped meeting here. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, brushing against her skin like a familiar greeting. "I hear you," she whispered softly into the flow of the water, "and I'm still listening." She set the stone back on the larger rock, aligning it perfectly as it had been, then stood with slow, deliberate calm. The forest around her felt brighter, the river warmer, the earth more alive beneath her feet. Something was returning to her, something she thought she had lost, and she was ready to follow wherever it led. Following the trail of footprints, Marin moved along the riverbank, where the trees leaned closer, their branches forming a gentle arch above her. The sounds of the water deepened, echoing softly between the stones as the river narrowed. She remembered this stretch well, especially during late autumn, when she and Elle would walk here just to listen to the wind thread itself through the reeds. But today the air felt different, charged somehow, as though the earth itself sensed a long-awaited story unfolding. The footprints led her off the riverbank and onto a small path veering into the deeper part of the forest. The canopy thickened, turning the light into a soft, even glow. Here the world grew still, the kind of stillness that felt intentional, like the forest holding its breath. She walked gently, her steps quiet on the moss-covered ground. It wasn't long before she saw it. A small wooden cabin hidden among the trees, its roof bowed slightly like an old man leaning into the wind. The wood was weathered, darkened by seasons of rain, but the structure was sturdy. Smoke curled lazily from a narrow chimney, blending into the canopy above. Marin's breath softened. This cabin had not been here years ago. At least, not like this. She moved closer, scanning the clearing. There were signs of recent life. Chopped firewood stacked neatly against the back wall, a water bucket half full beside the door, and footprints forming a small circle where someone had paced. She recognized the rhythm of those steps, slow, thoughtful, the same pacing Elle always did when deep in thought. Her fingers brushed the rough bark of a nearby tree as she approached the cabin. The forest was silent but not empty. She felt eyes on her, not threatening, just aware. A single candle sat on the cabin's window ledge, unlit but waiting, the wax shaped in a style she instantly recognized. Elle had made this candle recently. She stepped onto the small porch, her boots barely making a sound on the wooden planks. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently with each shift of the breeze. Myron hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the delicate ache of anticipation, the knowledge that stepping inside might change everything she had held steady for so many years. She touched the door with her fingertips and pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was simple. A small table near the window, a narrow bed with a woolen blanket folded neatly on top, shelves lined with jars of herbs and small tools. A quiet, lived-in feeling filled the space. Elle had always kept rooms like this, modest, orderly, carrying a quiet warmth even without firelight. What caught Marin's attention was the object on the table. A small wooden box, lid closed, sitting atop a folded cloth, and beside it, a note, written in the same trembling script from the letter. She approached slowly, the soft creak of the floorboards echoing beneath her feet. Her heartbeat rose, steady, gentle, but undeniably present. She unfolded the note. "I'm not far. If you're reading this, I knew you would find me. Follow the river at dusk. Elle." Marin exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The message was recent, ink still fresh enough to reflect a hint of light from the cabin window. And dusk. Dusk was only hours away. Her gaze drifted toward the wooden box. She lifted the lid gently. Inside was something that made her throat tighten. A small carving knife with a handle worn smooth from use. A knife she had once gifted to Elle on the day they finished carving the candle wrapped in cobalt cloth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the handle's familiar curve. This was not just a message. It was an invitation, a reminder of a promise long left unfulfilled. Marin closed the box and looked around the quiet cabin, imagining Elle's presence here, moving through the space, lighting the hearth, leaving the note with careful hope. The river's gentle murmur reached her through the open window. Dusk would come soon. and she would follow. For now she allowed herself a moment, just a moment, to stand in the cabin and feel the ghosts of old memories settle gently around her, no longer heavy, just present. Then she stepped out into the forest once more, ready for the next chapter the river would reveal. The forest began to shift as the afternoon softened toward evening. Light filtered through the trees in long, slanting beams, warm amber strokes that painted the moss and stones with a quiet glow. Maren walked slowly, allowing the forest's gentle transformation to wrap around her like a shawl. The air grew cooler, calmer, carrying the faint murmur of the river through the trees. She kept the note tucked safely inside her cloak, close enough to feel its weight against her heart. Follow the river at dusk. Elle's message echoed through her thoughts, steady as a heartbeat. The cabin faded behind her, swallowed gradually by the woods. The path toward the river was familiar, yet it felt different now, charged with the sense that something waited for her, something long overdue. Leaves whispered under her feet. Every rustle, every shift of shadow felt like part of a larger intention guiding her forward. By the time she reached the riverbank, dusk had begun its slow descent. The sky blushed with muted shades of lavender and rose, the colors reflecting softly across the water's surface. Fireflies drifted lazily above the grass, their small lights flickering like tiny promises rising from the earth. Maren stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle into her bones. This river, this place, had held more memories than she could name. It had carried laughter, sorrow, and the unspoken words that lingered between her and Elle across time. Tonight, it felt alive in a way she had not felt in years. The water flowed with a gentle hush, as though inviting her to listen, and so she did. She stepped closer to the edge, her boot sinking softly into the damp soil. The river wound ahead in a slow curve, darkening as the light faded. Somewhere along that bend, she knew it would lead her to Elle. But the message had said dusk, and dusk was now beginning to wrap the valley like a hush over a restless heart. She waited. The air cooled further. A light breeze drifted across the water, rippling the surface and lifting loose strands of her hair. She breathed deeply, letting the scent of pine and running water fill her lungs. The forest around her seemed to steady itself, growing quiet, expectant. She glanced downriver and froze. There, across the bend, a single light flickered. A small flame, delicate yet unwavering, floated upon the surface of the river. Not drifting randomly, no, it glided with purpose, carried on a tiny wooden board she recognized instantly. A board she and Elle had once used to send candles downstream when they were young, believing the river would carry their hopes to the world beyond the valley. Maren's chest tightened, a sweetness and ache intertwined. Her candle, no, their candle tradition, was returning to her. As the tiny flame approached, she noticed another shape beyond it, a silhouette standing still on the opposite bank, half hidden by the folding dusk. Tall, quiet, familiar in the way dreams feel familiar even after years of forgetting. Her breath caught. The figure did not move, but the tilt of the shoulders, the shape of the stance, the way the head angled slightly, she knew it, not with her eyes, but with every memory that had ever lived inside her. It was Elle. It had to be. Maren felt her pulse steady into something calm, like the rhythmic lap of the river against the stones. She did not call out. The moment was too delicate for sound. Instead, she simply watched the candle float closer, its flame warm against the gathering dusk. The river brought the little board to her feet. She knelt, touching the edge lightly with her fingertips. The flame flickered gently, as if greeting her. When she lifted her gaze again, the silhouette across the river had stepped closer to the water's edge, still silent, still waiting. The first stars began to shimmer in the sky above them, their faint light threading through the darkening canopy. Maren rose slowly, every movement deliberate, every breath steady. She did not yet cross the stones that bridged the shallow part of the river. That moment would come. The story was still unfolding. Instead, she whispered softly into the cooling air, "I'm here." The words drifted across the water, fragile and honest, carried by the evening breeze. And on the opposite bank, the silhouette lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Dusk settled fully then, wrapping the world in a velvet calm. Tonight, the river remembered. And so did they. The last traces of daylight slipped behind the treetops, leaving the riverbank washed in shades of indigo and silver. The soft hum of night creatures began to rise, crickets tuning themselves in the tall grass, owls stirring softly from hollowed trunks. The world felt held between breaths, waiting, listening. Maren stood at the river's edge, the tiny candle still glowing on the wooden board beside her. Its flame danced gently, unaffected by the slowly cooling air. Across the water, the silhouette remained, still and patient, as though carved from the dusk itself. A memory rose within her, warm and steady. "If we ever lose each other," Elle had once said, their voice young but certain, "we'll meet again at the shallow stones, no matter how much time has passed." The shallow stones lay just beyond the curve, flat, smooth rocks that created a natural crossing where the river narrowed. They had used that path countless times, their footsteps overlapping in the soft mud on either side. Maren inhaled deeply, the scent of evening settling around her. Wet earth, cedar, a faint trace of wildflowers carried from the far bank. She stepped away from the candle and began walking toward the crossing. The ground softened beneath her boots as she followed the familiar bend in the river. Moonlight broke through the clouds in thin silver ribbons, guiding her path. The stones appeared gradually, glistening subtly where the water skimmed over them. She paused at the first one. It was cool under her foot, smooth from years of river flow. The water murmured softly around her ankle, welcoming her with a gentle chill. She took another step, then another, the river deepening and shallowing in small rhythmic pulses. Halfway across, she paused, not from hesitation, but from the weight of the moment. She lifted her gaze. Elle was there, fully visible now in the moonlight. Though distance still separated them, the features of their face softened into clarity. Eyes shadowed by emotion she couldn't yet read, shoulders slightly hunched from travel or time or weight, carried alone. A cloak wrapped around them, its hem damp from the riverbank. Strands of hair brushed their forehead, just as they always had, falling in that same unruly way she had teased them about in their youth. Maren felt something inside her shift, an ache that had waited years for this quiet reunion. Elle stepped forward, stopping just at the edge of the river, allowing her the time she needed to finish crossing. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was full, not empty, woven with memories and waiting. Maren moved closer, stone by stone, breath by breath. When she reached the final stretch, where the water pooled deepest before easing to the opposite bank, Elle extended a hand, not commanding, not urgent, but offered gently, with the reverence of someone who still remembered how she preferred to move through fragile moments. Marin's fingers trembled as they hovered over Elle's, not from fear, from the fragile beauty of something returning that she once thought lost forever. Their hands touched. Warmth bloomed instantly. Quiet, steady, undeniable. A warmth that wasn't merely skin meeting skin, but two stories finally brushing together after years of wandering apart. Marin stepped onto the bank beside Elle. The world around them seemed to hush even further, the river softening its voice, the breeze stilling its breath. For a long moment they simply stood there, close enough to feel each other's presence, but not yet ready to break the spell with words. La's gaze softened. Something unspoken shimmered there. Regret, perhaps, or gratitude, or simply the weight of too many unspoken years. Marin didn't yet look directly into their eyes, not fully. Instead, she let her attention rest on the gentle rise and fall of Elle's breath, the familiar way their shoulders squared when holding back emotion. Finally, Elle whispered, voice low and careful, as though afraid the river might steal the words, "You came." Marin closed her eyes briefly, letting the warmth of the moment settle inside her. "I never stopped listening," she murmured. The moon climbed higher, casting them both in a soft, pale glow. And for the first time in countless years, the space between them felt whole again, not healed yet, not explained, but undeniably whole. They stood side by side at the water's edge, the night stretching long and quiet before them, gently urging them toward the story that waited to be told. For a long, quiet moment, they simply stood together at the river's edge, letting the night settle around them like a soft blanket. The moonlight painted the water in shimmering strokes, and the distant song of night birds drifted through the trees. Elle's hand remained loosely in Marin's, not holding her, not asking anything of her, only offering presence. A presence she hadn't felt in so many seasons that it almost didn't feel real. When Marin finally lifted her gaze to meet Elle's, it was like opening a door she'd kept closed for years. Elle's face had changed in small, tender ways. A few new lines at the corners of their eyes, a touch of silver beginning to thread through their hair. But the essence, the warmth, the depth, the quiet steadiness remained exactly as she remembered. Elle's eyes softened. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." Marin breathed slowly, letting the words fall between them like petals on water. "I didn't know if I would ever get the chance." The silence that followed was gentle, familiar. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of two lives that once moved in perfect rhythm and were now learning their steps again. They began walking together along the riverbank, not speaking at first. The night air wrapped around them, carrying hints of damp stone, cedar, and the distant sweetness of blooming night flowers. Their footsteps moved in quiet unison, just as they had years ago. Marin could almost hear echoes of their younger selves laughing along the path, chasing fireflies, whispering secrets they thought the world would never change. Eventually, Elle exhaled a long, steady breath. "There's so much I need to explain," they said, voice low. "But I don't want to rush you. We can take it slow, like we used to." Marin nodded, her fingers brushing lightly against the sleeve of Elle's cloak. "Slow is good," she said softly. "Slow is kind." The forest deepened around them as they walked. The moon filtered through branches, creating shifting silver shapes on the ground. Somewhere nearby, the river narrowed into a soft cascade, its steady sound like a heartbeat echoing through the valley. After a few moments, Elle paused and turned toward her. Their expression was earnest, almost fragile. I kept something, Elle said quietly. All these years. From their cloak pocket, they drew a small object wrapped in a piece of faded linen. Carefully, they unfolded it. Martin felt her breath still. Inside was the other half of the carving knife she had given them, the blade chipped long ago during one of their candle-making nights, the handle smoothed by years of touch. She remembered the night it broke. They were shaping the base of their shared candle, laughing too hard to keep a steady grip, and the blade snapped against a knot in the wood. She had thought Elle had thrown it away. "You kept it," she whispered, voice barely above the hush of the river. Elle nodded. "I couldn't let go of the things that reminded me of you, even when I thought I had no right to keep them." The confession hovered gently in the cool air, and Marin felt her heart shift, slow and warm, like embers waking beneath ash. They came to a fallen log beside the water, its surface smoothed by time and rain. Elle brushed leaves aside and motioned for her to sit. When they settled, the river reflected the moon in one long ribbon stretching into the distance. Elle spoke first, their voice steady but lined with something deeper. "Marin, I left because I thought it was what I had to do. I thought I could return before too much time passed. But seasons changed, roads shifted, and I found myself farther away than I ever meant to go." Marin listened, not interrupting, not rushing, letting the story find its own pace. "I carried the candle we made," Elle continued, glancing toward the river. "I kept thinking, when I return, we'll light it together. But I didn't return, not in time, and eventually—" They swallowed gently. I didn't know if I still deserved that moment. The pain in their words wasn't sharp. It was worn soft, smoothed by years. A quiet ache rather than a wound. Marin placed her hand on the log between them, close enough that Elle could feel her warmth. "You came back," she said simply, "and that matters more than anything else." Elle turned toward her, eyes shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "I hoped you'd say that," they whispered. The river flowed on, calm and certain. The trees stood in quiet witness. And for the first time in many seasons, Marin felt the threads of old seasons weaving themselves gently into something new, something fragile, something possible. Night wrapped around them, soothing and deep. The story between them had only just begun to open again. Night deepened gently around them, the sky shifting into a velvet tapestry stitched with quiet stars. The river's soft rhythm filled the spaces between their breaths, steady and unhurried. Marin sat beside Elle on the fallen log, feeling the weight of the moment settle with a fragile grace. This place, their place, seemed to hold the story for them, offering comfort in the hush of flowing water. Elle rested the broken carving knife in their palm, turning it thoughtfully. The blade glinted faintly in the moonlight, edges worn, handle smooth from old journeys. Marin could see the careful way they held it, as though it were a relic rather than a simple tool, a piece of the past too sacred to mishandle. "It wasn't just distance," Elle said quietly, their voice shaped by years they hadn't yet named. "It wasn't only the roads or the storms. I carried things with me, things I didn't know how to set down." Marin looked at them softly, waiting. Elle had always needed time to unwrap their truths. "I wandered," Elle continued, "not out of desire, but because I didn't know where I belonged anymore. After your parents passed, after the village changed, after everything shifted so quickly, I thought leaving would give me clarity. I told myself I would find answers out there." They paused, eyes drifting toward the river as though the water might finish the sentence for them. "But answers were harder to find than I thought. A far-off owl called from the treetops, its voice deep and steady, grounding the night. Marin spoke gently. "Where did you go?" Elle exhaled as though the question had waited years to be asked. "Everywhere and nowhere. I went north first, toward the mountain villages, worked with the shepherd clans for a season, thinking the quiet might help me sort things out. Then east to the coastal towns. I helped a lighthouse keeper for a while. After that, I followed caravans through the lowlands." Marin listened with the slow, deep patience she had always given them. "I learned a lot," Elle said. "How to mend nets, how to navigate by the stars, how to read the weather from the way birds fly. But the more I learned, the heavier things felt. Every time I thought of returning, I worried I'd come back, different, too different, or that you had already moved forward without me." Marin lowered her gaze briefly, her hands resting on her lap. "I waited," she said quietly. "Not the kind of waiting that keeps you frozen, but the kind that keeps a space open, just in case." Elle's breath caught, a tiny, unsteady sound. "I wasn't sure I deserved that space anymore." "You don't have to deserve it," Marin murmured. "It existed because we made it together." The wind shifted, brushing softly against their shoulders. Elle turned the knife handle over again, tracing a groove with their thumb. "There were moments," Elle said, "when I thought of coming back right away, but then I'd remember the candle we made, the one we never lit. I wanted us to light it at the right time, the real time, not rushed, not as a distraction from pain. I wanted it to mean something." "It still can," Marin whispered. Elle finally looked at her then, truly looked. Their eyes reflected the moonlight, calm but carrying storms long past. "I left pieces of myself everywhere I traveled," they said, "but the piece that mattered most, it stayed here with you. I think I always knew that." Marin felt something loosen inside her chest, like a knot gently coming undone. "The candle," Elle continued softly, "is more than wax and wick. It's everything we promised, everything we lost, everything we kept alive in different ways. And I think I'm ready to light it now." The words settled over them like falling light, quiet, delicate, full of meaning. Marin reached out, placing her hand on Elle's once more. Their palms fit together as though time had never pried them apart. "We'll light it together," she said, "when the moment is right." Elle nodded, their shoulders easing, the heaviness in their posture softening like thawed snow. For a while they sat in silence, but it was not an empty silence. It was full, rich with decades of unspoken stories, woven with threads of old seasons and new beginnings. The river murmured, the stars shimmered softly, and somewhere deep in the forest, a sense of peace began to grow, tentative, hopeful, and real. Tonight, the weight of wandered years had finally found a place to rest. The moon climbed higher, casting a silver veil across the forest clearing. The river's steady whisper filled the spaces between Marin and Elle, smoothing the edges of everything unspoken. They sat together on the fallen log, neither needing to fill the air with constant words. The quiet felt like a soft quilt, wrapping them both in a long-awaited ease. Elle took a slow breath, their shoulders rising and falling with the weight of thoughts long carried. "There were nights," they said quietly, "when the silence felt too loud, when I wished I'd turned back sooner. I kept imagining this place, our river, our clearing, and wondering how much I'd lost by staying away." Marin twined her fingers gently together, feeling the damp coolness of the night settle across her skin. "You were finding your way," she murmured. "Sometimes the path home has to stretch wider before it can narrow again. Elle's eyes softened with gratitude, or perhaps relief. I hope you can forgive the years I missed. Maren turned her gaze toward the water. It reflected the moon like a long, trembling ribbon of light, beautiful even in its imperfection. There are things to forgive, she admitted, but there is nothing to regret. And forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's something that grows, like night turning slowly into dawn. Elle let out a quiet breath, the tension in their frame easing inch by inch. A firefly drifted between them, its tiny glow blinking in gentle rhythms before floating toward the river. Maren watched it rise and fall in the air like a heartbeat. "This place remembers us," she said softly. "All the things we whispered here, all the hopes we planted." "And all the mistakes," Elle added, but their voice held no bitterness, only truth. Maren nodded. "Yes, but mistakes soften over time. They become echoes, and echoes become gentle once you stop running from them." A small smile tugged at Elle's lips, the first one Maren had seen since their reunion. It was faint but real, warming the lines of their face. "You always knew how to say things in a way that made them feel possible." "Not always," Maren said with a soft chuckle, "but tonight, maybe." They sat for a few moments longer, letting the night cradle them. The forest rustled with small nocturnal lives, the brush of wings, the scurry of tiny paws, the hush of branches swaying lightly above. The world felt tender, as though the landscape itself knew to step lightly around them. Elle shifted slightly, reaching into the inner pocket of their cloak. "There's something else I've kept," they said. "Something I wasn't sure I would ever show you." Maren's breath stilled, not in fear but in quiet anticipation. Elle withdrew a folded piece of parchment, its edges worn, its surface softened by years of travel. They held it carefully, as though the paper might crumble if handled with anything less than reverence. "This," Elle said softly, "is the letter I wrote to you the first night I left the valley. I never sent it. I didn't know how, or when, or if it would be better not to." Maren accepted the parchment with slow, steady hands. Her fingers brushed against Elle's as she unfolded the paper. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was unmistakably theirs. Confident strokes, softened by tremors of emotion. She began reading silently, heart tightening as the words revealed themselves. "Maren, I don't know how long I'll be gone. I'll be, or if I'll return the same. But please know this. Leaving isn't about you. It's about the parts of me I don't understand yet. If I ever find my way back, it will be because of the space you made in my life, the kind that feels like light, even in the darkest places." Maren's eyes blurred for a moment, not from pain, but from the deep human ache of understanding someone more fully than before. Elle watched her quietly. "I wanted to leave something honest behind," they whispered, "even if I couldn't bring myself to send it." She folded the parchment gently and handed it back. "Thank you for letting me read that." Elle shook their head softly. "No. Thank you for still being here." The river continued its soft, endless murmur, a sound that had carried through all the years they spent apart. And now it held them again, smoothing the frayed threads of two stories, slowly weaving themselves back together. Maren leaned forward slightly, her voice low and warm. "The candle will be ready soon," she said. "But before we light it, there are things you should know about what happened while you were gone." Elle's eyes lifted, steady and open. "I'm listening, truly." The night drew closer around them, not as a curtain, but as a comforting embrace. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the past finally felt ready to unfold. The night wrapped gently around them as Marin gathered her thoughts, letting the river's rhythm steady the places inside her that still felt tender. Elle sat quietly beside her on the fallen log, their posture open, patient, ready to receive whatever truth she chose to offer. For a moment, Marin simply listened to the water gliding over the stones, as though drawing courage from its calm persistence. "When you left," she began softly, "I told myself it would be for a season, maybe two. I imagined you wandering, learning, growing, and then returning with stories you'd tell me by the hearth." Elle's eyes lowered, but they said nothing, allowing her the space to continue. "But seasons kept passing," Marin said, her voice steady, though tinged with something quieter, deeper. "1 year became 2, then 5, then more. And each time the frost returned to the valley, I found myself coming to the clearing, waiting." She leaned forward slightly, her fingers brushing the moss beneath her. "At first, I thought I was foolish. Who waits that long for someone who left without knowing when they'd return? But hope is a strange kind of companion. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It settles into corners of your life so quietly that you forget it's there until you notice the ache it leaves behind." Elle drew in a slow breath. "I never meant to make you carry the weight of uncertainty. I never wanted to be a ghost in your years." Marin offered a faint, gentle smile. "You weren't a ghost, not exactly. More like a chapter I kept rereading, hoping one day the ending would change." The wind stirred the trees above them, scattering a few leaves that drifted lazily across the river. Moonlight caught their edges, turning them silver as they spun in the air. "I tried to fill the space you left," she continued. "I worked, I made candles, I helped the villagers whenever I could. I laughed sometimes, really laughed. I wasn't unhappy, not truly. But there was an emptiness that lingered at the edges of everything. It wasn't painful, just hollow." Elle's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for growing," Marin said gently. "But I do want you to understand the years you missed. Not so you'll feel guilt, but so we can move forward honestly." Elle nodded, their expression earnest, eyes reflecting the rippling moonlight like small pools of sincerity. "There were good things, too," Marin added, her tone softening. "The villagers supported me when my parents fell ill. Taryn brought me honey every week, claiming it helped with the cough. Mina taught me how to steep herbs properly. I learned resilience and patience." She breathed out slowly. "But the hardest part wasn't losing them. It was realizing I didn't know if I should keep waiting for you or if waiting only hurt me more." Blair's hand tightened slightly on the broken knife in their lap, knuckles paling with the pressure. "And yet, you kept the candle wrapped." "I did," she said, "because some promises feel rooted in the soul, even when the path forward becomes unclear." Elle's eyes lifted, meeting hers with a depth that held remorse and gratitude in equal measure. "I never knew," they said, voice trembling softly. "I never imagined you carried so much. If I had known, perhaps I would have found my way home sooner." Marin shook her head gently. "We can't rewrite the years, and I don't want to. They made us who we are. You found pieces of yourself out there in the world. I found strength here. Now we're meeting in a place where both truths can exist." Silence followed, soft, healing, honest. "It wasn't all waiting," Marin admitted after a pause. "I built a life. I grew into my own skin. But every year on the night of the first frost, I lit 3 candles in the window, one for my parents, one for myself, and one for you." Elle's breath caught sharply emotion flickering across their features. For me? For you, she repeated gently. Because even though I didn't know where you were, I hoped you felt the light somehow, wherever you wandered. A single tear traced a slow path down Elle's cheek. They didn't hide it. They let it fall, quietly, respectfully, into the moss at their feet. The forest around them felt impossibly tender, as if leaning closer to witness a reunion years in the making. Finally, Elle whispered, "Thank you for keeping the light alive, even when I didn't deserve it." Maren placed her hand on theirs, steady, warm, unwavering. "It wasn't about deserving," she said softly. "It was about remembering." Their fingers intertwined, not out of desperation, but out of an old familiarity slowly finding new shape. And in that moment, beneath the silver glow of the moon and the murmuring river, the years she carried alone no longer felt heavy. They simply felt understood. A calm quiet settled over the forest, deeper now, as though the night itself leaned in to cradle the story unfolding between them. The river murmured in soft, liquid breaths. Fireflies drifted near the water's edge like floating embers from a gentle fire. And the moon, round and luminous, cast a pale glow that softened every contour of their world. Maren kept her hand within Elle's, the warmth between them spreading in slow, steady waves. For the first time in many years, she felt the valley holding them both, like an old friend, relieved to see a promise mended. Elle looked out across the water, expression shadowed by memory. "There was a night," they said quietly, "far from here, when I thought I wouldn't make it home at all." Maren turned to them, her breath catching just slightly. "What happened?" Elle took a slow, grounding breath before speaking, as though gathering scattered fragments of a difficult truth. "It was during a harsh winter 2 valleys east of the old trade routes. I was traveling with a caravan. We'd lost 3 wagons to sudden storms, and the mountains grew colder by the hour." Their voice lowered, steady, but threaded with buried tension. "I fell behind one day, injured my ankle on a hidden stone beneath the snow. The caravan couldn't wait. They'd warned me, but I told myself I would catch up." The image placed itself easily in Maren's mind. Elle alone in a frozen expanse, winter pressing against them like a wall, their breath-forming clouds that disappeared into the vastness. "The storm came at dusk," Elle continued, "a wall of wind and ice. I could barely see an arm's length in front of me. Every direction looked the same, white, endless, unforgiving." Maren felt her heart constrict, her thumb brushing gently across the back of Elle's hand. "I found a hollow beneath a fallen tree," Elle said. "Barely enough shelter to keep me alive. The wind screamed all night. I thought it was the end, and for the first time in years, I let myself think of home, of you." Their voice wavered just slightly. "I remember holding the broken knife against my chest and imagining this valley, how the river sounds, how the candles glowed in your workshop. I thought of the promise we made to light that candle, and something in me refused to die." Maren's breath was slow, deep, trembling at its edges. "You found strength in a memory," Elle nodded. "In you, in us, in the life I should have never left so carelessly." They paused, swallowing gently. "When dawn came, the storm eased. A shepherd found me and brought me to safety. But something changed in that night. Something in me turned back toward this valley, even if it took me years to follow." Maren closed her eyes, letting the truth of Elle's journey sink into her with quiet reverence. "The valley didn't forget you," she whispered. "I didn't forget you." "I know," Elle said softly. "I felt it Whenever I looked at the sky, whenever I heard a river, whenever I lit a candle in some faraway place. Another breath passed between them, shared, warm, familiar. It wasn't only hardship, Elle added gently. I found kindness out there, too. I met people who taught me new trades, who shared their hearths, who made me realize that the world is wider than we ever dreamed as children. Their gaze softened, but none of them felt like home. A long silence followed, tender and full, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Marin whispered, "Why didn't you send word, even once?" Elle flinched, not visibly, but inwardly, like a lantern flame flickering in a sudden breeze. "Because I feared the answer," they admitted. "If you wrote back with resentment, or if you didn't write back at all, I wasn't sure I could bear it." Silence felt safer than truth. Marin shook her head slowly, not with reproach, but with deep understanding. "Silence can be a comfort," she said softly, "but it can also be a cage." "It was," Elle replied, "for both of us." Another firefly drifted past, landing briefly on Elle's sleeve before lifting back into the night. The moment felt fragile and luminous, like something that could only exist in the space between sorrow and healing. Marin turned fully toward Elle. Her voice was gentle but certain. "You're here now, and the valley, the river, the candles, they've been waiting to welcome you back. We don't need to rush the past or bury it. We just need to let it breathe." Elle's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, reflecting the quiet strength of her words. "I want to learn how to stay this time," Elle whispered. "If you'll let me." Marin reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from Elle's forehead, a gesture so familiar it felt like a forgotten heartbeat returning. "Staying isn't a question of permission," she said with a soft smile. "It's a question of choosing, and if you choose to stay, then you'll find me here." The world around them seemed to hold its breath, then release it in a long, soothing sigh, the leaves rustling softly, the river gliding with renewed serenity. For the first time in many years, the valley felt whole. The night, in all its quiet splendor, had finally begun to mend what time had scattered. The moon drifted higher still, softening the world in its silver glow. The river shimmered like a slow-moving ribbon of light, wrapping the clearing in a gentle embrace. Marin and Elle rose from the fallen log, neither rushing, neither hesitant, simply moving as though guided by some quiet pull shaped from years of unfinished threads. "Come," Marin said softly, gesturing toward the water. "Walk with me." Elle nodded, falling into step beside her. The path along the riverbank felt different now, less like a line separating past and present, and more like a seam stitching them gently together. Their footsteps were soft on the damp soil, and the night hummed around them in peaceful acceptance. The river's surface reflected their silhouettes as they walked, a pair of shadows moving in parallel, occasionally brushing close, as if testing the weight of reconnection. Elle glanced toward the water, their voice a low murmur. "Do you ever think the river remembers us the way we remembered it?" Marin smiled faintly. "Rivers remember everything. They carry pieces of every voice, every story, every moment whispered near them. It all flows forward, but it never disappears." "So it remembers when we carved our candle there?" Elle asked. "And when we argued about the shape," Marin added, laughing softly. "You insisted the spiral should curve inward. I wanted it to open outward." Elle chuckled, quiet but real. "I still think I was right." "You weren't," Marin said gently. "Perhaps not," Elle conceded, their smile lingering. "But you let me believe it then." They walked a little farther, letting shared memories rise and settle like petals floating downstream. Every few steps Elle would glance at Marin, not intrusively, but with a kind of quiet awe, as though still reconciling the closeness of this moment with the years of distance that preceded it. When they reached a cluster of smooth river stones, Marin knelt, placing her hand against one of them. It was cool beneath her palm, worn down by decades of patient water. Elle watched her, waiting. "This was where we used to cross the river," she said, "on nights when we wanted to be anywhere but inside our homes." Elle knelt beside her. "We were always running towards something, or running away." "And now?" she asked quietly. Elle considered the question, their breath forming a soft cloud in the cool night air. "Now, I think I'm ready to stop running at all." The answer settled into Marin like a warm ember drifting into place. They rose again, stepping lightly onto the stones that bridged the river. The water here was shallow, only brushing their ankles, sending tiny ripples outward as they moved. Marin felt the chill of it seep through her boots, refreshing, grounding. Halfway across, she paused. "Do you remember the night we made our vow here?" she asked. Elle nodded, eyes soft. "We promised that no matter what paths we took, we'd meet again at the river, that we'd bring our stories home, and that we'd light the candle," Marin finished. Together they continued to the opposite bank. The moment their feet touched the mossy ground, the forest seemed to brighten with an almost imperceptible shift, a small sigh of recognition, as if acknowledging an old promise kept. They stood facing each other, the river murmuring gently behind them. "You crossed first this time," Elle said thoughtfully. "Why does that matter?" Marin asked, with a tilt of her head. Elle shrugged lightly, brushing a thumb across the broken handle of the knife tucked into their belt. "It doesn't, but it feels symbolic, you leading, me following. Not out of fear or distance, but out of trust." Marin stepped closer, just enough that the warmth of their bodies touched the space between them. "We walk together," she murmured, "through whatever comes next." The moon cast their shadows into one long silhouette, stretching behind them, merging, softening. They continued walking along the opposite bank, where the trees grew closer together, forming a quiet corridor of night-black trunks and silver-lit leaves. The path here was narrow, lined with stones and soft ferns that brushed their ankles. Elle inhaled deeply, voice lower now, calmer. "I used to dream about this, about walking beside you again, but the dreams always shifted before I reached you." "And now that you have?" Elle looked at her, truly looked. "It feels real and unreal, like stepping into a memory that somehow kept growing even while I was gone." Marin reached out and traced a gentle line on Elle's sleeve, grounding the moment. "This is not a memory," she whispered. "This is a beginning." Elle closed their eyes briefly, letting the words settle inside them. When they opened them again, there was something steadier there, a quiet faith reclaiming its shape. Ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing Marin recognized instantly. Fireflies drifted lazily above the tall grass. The river curved wider here, catching the moonlight like a bowl of silver fire. "This place," Elle breathed, slowing as they stepped into the clearing. "This is where we talked about the future," Marin nodded, "and where we feared it." Elle turned to her, their voice warm but cautious. "Are you ready to speak of ours again?" Marin's heartbeat softened. Her answer came like a slow exhale. "Yes." The night held them gently, as though blessing this new chapter with its quiet embrace. Somewhere deep in the valley, an owl called. a low, steady note echoing promise. Side by side, Marin and Elle stood at the center of the clearing, the river glimmering beside them. And for the first time in a long, wandering while, the future felt like something they could shape together. The clearing unfolded before them like a memory waking gently from sleep. Tall grasses swayed in the night breeze, catching silver moonlight along their tips. Fireflies drifted in slow, unhurried arcs above the earth, their warm glows rising and falling like soft breathing. The air smelled of damp soil and wild mint, a scent that once meant summer evenings spent barefoot, dreaming up futures too vast for the valley to contain. Marin stepped into the heart of the clearing, inhaling deeply. "It hasn't changed," she murmured. "Not really." Elle followed a step behind, their gaze sweeping the familiar ring of oaks and the stone-lined edge of the river. "No," they agreed, "but it feels different now, like it's been waiting." "For us?" she asked. "For this moment," Elle said, voice gentle but certain. They walked slowly toward the flat stone at the center of the clearing, an old meeting stone worn smooth by years of weather and time. As children, they had used it as a table, a stage, a place to carve their initials. As teenagers, it became a place of secrets whispered in the dark. And as young adults, they had stood upon it during their last night together in this valley, speaking words they'd both been too afraid to fully understand. Now Marin brushed her hand across its cool surface. The stone felt familiar beneath her palm, grounding, as if it remembered every version of who they had once been. Elle sat beside her, carefully placing the broken carving knife on the stone. "I used to picture this place when I felt lost," they said quietly. "Not the roads, not the houses, just this clearing, as if coming back to it would help me find the parts of myself I'd misplaced." Marin lowered herself beside them, their shoulders nearly touching. "And did it?" she asked softly. "Yes," Elle whispered, "tonight it did." They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the river's slow drift. The water's whisper carried the tenderness of old stories, ones the valley had watched them live, ones it now welcomed them home to finish. The moon slipped past a thin veil of clouds, casting the clearing in a wash of white gold light. Marin looked up, her eyes tracing the constellations she had memorized long ago. "The North Star is lower than it used to be," she said thoughtfully. Elle smiled. "Or maybe we're standing taller." She laughed quietly, the sound soft as moss. Elle's smile warmed in response, a smile both familiar and changed, shaped by years of wandering and shadows and hard-earned wisdom. "I want to tell you something," Marin said, after a moment. Her voice was calm, but a fragile truth trembled beneath it. Elle turned toward her slightly. "Anything." Marin's fingers grazed the edge of the stone as she gathered her thoughts. "There were times I thought you'd forgotten this place, or me. Not out of cruelty, just because life swept you up and took you far." Elle's breath deepened, steady yet aching. "I never forgot you, not once." "I know that now," she said softly. "But there were winters when the waiting felt heavy, nights when the world grew quiet, and I wasn't sure if I was holding on to hope or just holding on to habit." Elle's expression softened into something luminous, woven from remorse and tenderness. "I wish I could have eased that weight," they murmured. "But I wasn't ready then to return or to face what I'd left behind." Marin nodded slowly. "We were young. Young hearts can hold love, but they don't always know how to carry it." Elle shifted closer, not touching her, but allowing warmth to cross the small space between them. "Do you think we're ready now?" they asked, the question fragile and hopeful all at once. Maren tilted her head, studying them in the soft moonlight. She saw everything, the tiredness of traveled miles, the scars left by solitude, the spark of something rekindling. And she saw, too, the steady thread that had never truly broken between them. "Yes," she said with quiet conviction, "I think the valley has been waiting for us to be." A breeze flowed softly through the clearing then, rustling the grass in a way that felt almost like approval. Leaves shimmered overhead, and the fireflies drifted in closer, as though drawn to the warmth forming between the two figures on the stone. Elle let out a long, exhaled breath, one that seemed to release years of tension from their shoulders. "I missed this," they said, "not just the place, not just the river or the trees. I missed being known, being seen." Maren's hand moved closer on the stone surface until it brushed theirs. The touch was feather light, but the effect was profound. "You are still known," she whispered, "and you are still seen." Elle's hand turned, fingers curling around hers with deliberate gentleness, slow, as though savoring the rediscovery of how their palms once fit so perfectly together. The clearing glowed a little brighter, or perhaps it only felt that way, because something inside Maren and Elle had shifted, an old door cracking open, letting in new warmth. For the first time since their reunion, Maren allowed herself to imagine the nights ahead, nights filled with long conversations, shared candles, and the soft rebuilding of something that had never truly died. Beside her, Elle's thumb traced a small, reverent circle against her skin. "This time," Elle said quietly, "I want to write my story with yours, not apart, not wandering." Maren leaned slightly toward them, her voice nearly a breath. "Then let's begin where we left off." The night deepened, rich and welcoming, as though embracing the fragile hope rising between them, and the valley, patient and wise, stood witness to two hearts quietly finding their way back. The forest around them had quieted into a deep velvet stillness, the kind that arrives only when night is certain of its place. Maren and Elle remained on the old meeting stone for several minutes longer, sharing silence like a warm cup passed between tired hands. But gradually the air shifted, just enough for Maren to sense a subtle pull from somewhere deeper in the woods. She rose slowly, brushing moss from her palm. "There's something I want to show you," she said. Elle stood as well, curiosity softening their expression. "Something new?" "Not new," Maren replied. "Something I found while you were gone. I've kept it safe, even though I didn't understand why." The intrigue in Elle's eyes brightened. "Lead the way." They walked together along a narrow path that wound deeper into the trees, their shoulders brushing occasionally in the dim glow of moonlight. The forest here was older, its trees thick with age, roots twisting like ancient hands beneath the soil. Owls hooted from hidden branches, and somewhere nearby a fox darted softly through the brush. After several minutes, Maren stopped beside an enormous oak. Its trunk was wide enough that 3 people could stand behind it unseen, and its branches curled upward like a crown sculpted by time. Near its base was a hollow, small, dark, and easy to miss unless one knew exactly where to look. Maren knelt, brushing aside a curtain of ivy with familiar ease. Inside the hollow, dimly illuminated by moonlight, sat a small lantern crafted from wood and iron. Its frame was carved with swirling designs, and its glass panels, though dusty, still caught light in faint, warm glimmers. Elle inhaled sharply. "I know this lantern," they whispered, voice low with awe. It belonged to your father. Marin nodded, lifting it carefully. I found it here a few years after he passed. I don't know how it ended up in the hollow. Maybe he hid it. Maybe the forest kept it. But every time I thought to move it, something inside me said to wait. She stood and handed it gently to Elle. Their fingers trembled slightly as they accepted it. They turned it slowly in their hands, tracing the carved patterns. Your father taught me how to light this lantern, Elle murmured. He said light wasn't meant to chase away the darkness. It was meant to keep us company inside it. Marin smiled softly. He said the same to me. Elle ran their thumb over the clasp where the lantern opened. He used to bring this to the river during festivals, they said, letting it float downstream with wishes tied inside. I remember. Marin's voice was warm with nostalgia. One year he tied 2 wishes, one for me and one for you. Elle laughed softly, bittersweet. Mine said, let them always find each other. He showed it to me before he let the lantern go. Marin looked up at them, the moonlight catching in her eyes. He believed paths meant for one another always reconnect. Elle swallowed gently, emotion edging their voice. He would be relieved to see this moment. Marin stepped closer, touching the lantern where Elle's hands held it. He'd be proud of how far you wandered, and even prouder that you found your way back. The lantern seemed to glow faintly at that, whether from reflection or memory, neither could tell. Elle opened the small latch and peered inside. There's something here, they said softly. Marin blinked. I thought the lantern was empty. Elle reached in, fingertips brushing something thin and folded. They carefully pulled it out, a small scrap of paper, yellowed slightly with age, but intact. The handwriting upon it was unmistakable, her father's. Marin's breath stilled. Elle unfolded it gently. Moonlight revealed a few simple words in an elegant, steady script. For the day they returned to the same path. Marin felt her throat tighten, a warm ache blooming in her chest. He knew, she whispered. Even then, Elle exhaled slowly. He had faith in us, more than I had in myself. Marin touched Elle's arm gently. Faith doesn't demand certainty, just possibility. Elle folded the message carefully and placed it back inside the lantern. When they shut the clasp, the lantern felt somehow fuller, as though holding not only light, but memory, blessing, and quiet hope. Let's bring it with us, Marin suggested. When we light the candle, this lantern should be there. It belongs to the story. Elle nodded, their fingers curving protectively around the handle. Then it will be. They turned back toward the path, walking side by side beneath the canopy of ancient branches. The lantern swayed gently between them, its faint glimmers brushing their steps with a soft, golden promise. The night felt deeper now, yet warmer, as though the forest had wrapped them in recognition, murmuring through its leaves. Some stories circle back not to where they began, but to where they were always meant to continue. And Marin, feeling the truth of that settle inside her, walked on with Elle toward the next, turning in their shared, long-awaited journey. They walked back toward the riverbank with the lantern swinging gently between them, its soft metallic clinks marking a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The moon had shifted westward, lowering just enough to tint the clearing with a muted glow. A hush fell over the valley, not empty, but anticipatory, as though the land sensed that a chapter long suspended in the air was at last ready to descend into place. Marin led the way to a small outcropping of stones overlooking the water. Long ago this was where she and Elle would gather driftwood to build their evening fires. The memories here were layered, smoke curling into a violet twilight sky, laughter rising with embers, whispered futures they thought they understood. Tonight, those memories returned not to wound, but to offer warmth. Elle set the lantern gently on a flat stone, brushing away pine needles before placing it down. The lantern, even unlit, seemed to glow with its own quiet story. Her father's hands, the wishes tied inside, the river carrying their hopes into the world beyond. Marin knelt beside it. "Let's build a fire," she whispered. "It feels right." Elle nodded, already searching for fallen branches. They moved with a familiarity that startled Marin, each choosing wood of the right density, the right dryness, stacking it in the same crisscross pattern they had learned as children. Though so many years had passed, their hands found old rhythms easily, as if guided by memory itself. When the fire caught, it did so gently, flames rising in slow, graceful breaths, licking upward in hues of deep amber and soft gold. The warmth spread in a steady bloom, pooling around their ankles, creeping into their palms. Elle sat close beside Marin, drawing their cloak around both of them to ward off the growing chill. "I spent so many nights by strange fires," they murmured, watching sparks drift upward like tiny stars. But none of them felt like this. Marin rested her hands near the flames, palms open, because this one belongs to more than just the night. It belongs to our story. Elle turned their gaze to her, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "And you were the hearth I kept searching for, even when I didn't understand what I was seeking." Marin felt warmth gather in her chest, slow, full, unhurried. "I'm glad you found your way back to it." They sat in silence for a while, letting the fire speak for them. Its crackle was soft but steady, weaving itself into the river's distant murmur and the rustle of leaves. Above them, stars blinked into existence one by one, quiet witnesses to a reunion shaped by years of wandering, waiting, and longing. Elle traced a fingertip across the edge of the lantern. "When we light the candle," they said, "what will it mean for you?" Marin thought for a long moment. "It will mean the past can rest," she said finally, "and the future has room to breathe." Elle nodded slowly. "For me, it means I'm ready to stop running from the things I love, ready to build something, ready to stay." Marin leaned slightly closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of Elle's shoulder through the cloak. "Staying is not about never leaving again," she said. "It's about choosing to return to the people, the places, the promises that shape you." The fire crackled softly as if agreeing. "I learned something while you were gone," Marin added. "That love changes shape. It doesn't disappear. It grows patient. It grows quiet. It becomes something that waits without demanding and welcomes without question." Elle swallowed gently, emotion softening their voice. "I don't know if I can ever repay the years you held space for me." "You don't have to repay anything," Marin said. "Just walk the path with me now, that's all." The wind whispered through the clearing, brushing their faces with a cool touch that contrasted the fire's warmth. Elle shifted closer until their shoulders touched, not by accident, but with intention. Marin didn't move. Instead, she leaned into the closeness, allowing it to anchor her in this moment that felt both fragile and eternal. Elle whispered, "I don't want this night to end." Marin smiled softly. "The night will end, but the story won't." They sat like that for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, warmed by the fire, held by the valley that had carried their echoes for years. At last, Marin lifted the lantern, its weight familiar and full. She set it between them, tilting it slightly so the fire's glow spilled across its glass panels. "When we light the candle," she said quietly, "this lantern will hold its flame, and the flame will hold our promise." Elle bowed their head. "Then let it be a promise of returning, not only to this valley, but to each other." A tender understanding passed between them, woven from all they had endured, all they had rediscovered, all they still hoped to build. The fire burned steady, its warmth expanding like a gentle heartbeat through the clearing. And in that soft, glowing space, the first true shape of their shared future began to form. The fire burned low and warm, casting gentle rings of light across the clearing. Its glow flickered over Marin's face, softening her features, glinting in her eyes like small reflections of distant stars. Elle watched her quietly for a moment, as though trying to commit every detail to memory, not from fear of losing her again, but from the deep relief of knowing they no longer had to. Marin lifted the lantern from where it rested between them and turned it in her hands. "There's something we need," she said softly. "Something waiting back at my home." Elle nodded, understanding instantly. "The candle." "Yes," Marin breathed. "It's time." They extinguished the fire with slow, deliberate motions, pressing aside the embers, watching them dim into faint glows, then pale smudges of heat in the ash. The night around them seemed to gather the moment gently, as if it too understood the significance of what was coming. As they walked back along the riverbank, the lantern swung lightly from Elle's hand, catching the moonlight with each step. The forest whispered with its nocturnal life, branches rustling, insects humming their thin, steady songs, the river offering its constant, soothing murmur. They reached Marin's cottage a short while later, its silhouette rising from the valley like an old friend awaiting their return. A soft light glowed from inside, the warm breath of candles resting peacefully in their room of quiet flames. Marin paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply. "This place has waited too," she said, "for this moment, for us." Elle's voice was gentle. "May I come in?" Marin smiled, touched by the respect in the question, despite everything they had shared tonight. "Of course," she said. "You were always meant to." They stepped into the workshop together, the familiar scent of beeswax, lavender, and cedarwood surrounding them like an embrace. Shelves towered around the room, each lined with candles of every shape and meaning, memories stored in wax, stories preserved in quiet flame. At the center of the room, upon its pedestal, the cobalt-wrapped candle waited. Its cloth shimmered subtly in the lamplight, deep blue like a fragment of night sky tied with a silver thread, now frayed with years. Marin approached it slowly, reverently, her steps almost silent on the worn wooden floor. Elle remained beside her, breath steady, eyes fixed on the candle that had bound their stories together even through years of distance. Marin touched the cloth gently, feeling the familiar coolness of it beneath her fingertips. "I haven't opened this since the day we wrapped it," she murmured. "I wasn't ready." "And now?" Elle asked tenderly. Marin exhaled. "Now, I think I am." With hands steady but filled with emotion, she began untying the silver thread. The knot loosened easily, as though time itself had decided to cooperate. The cloth unfurled in soft folds, revealing the candle beneath. Elle inhaled sharply. It was exactly as they had shaped it decades ago, tall and smooth, with gentle curves where their thumbs had pressed the warm wax. Along its sides were the carvings, the spiral Marin insisted should expand outward. The star Elle had etched for guidance, the tiny river wave symbol they'd added last, laughing when it smeared, and they had to carve it again. Time had not dulled the details. It had only made them more beautiful. Marin lifted the candle from its pedestal, holding it as though it were something living. "This has waited for us," she whispered. "Every year, every season. It waited because we weren't ready to light it alone." Elle's jaw trembled slightly. "We aren't alone now." "No," Marin said softly. "We're not." She set the candle gently upon her work table and reached for a small, thin taper, a lighting candle she often used to kindle the wicks of newly made creations. She offered it to Elle. "Will you light the first flame?" she asked. Elle hesitated, eyes glistening. "Are you sure?" "I want to share this," Marin said. "Together." Elle nodded with slow, reverent acceptance. They took the taper, holding it carefully between their fingers, feeling its feather-light weight, so minimal and yet symbolic in a way that made their breath catch. Marin struck a match against the stone plate on her table. The flare rose bright before softening into a steady glow. She lit the taper and stepped back, allowing Elle space. Elle lifted the taper toward the candle, fingers trembling slightly, not with uncertainty, but with the quiet awe of a moment that had lived in their heart for far too long. But before the flame could touch the wick, Elle lowered the taper, voice barely above a whisper. "Marin, before we light it, there is something I want to say." Marin turned toward them, her breath still and open. "I'm listening." Elle swallowed gently. "I'm lighting this not as a symbol of returning from the past, but as a promise to be present in your future, whatever that looks like, whatever path opens next." Marin felt warmth rise, soft and steady. "Then let's make that promise together." Elle raised the taper once more. The wick waited, unburned, untouched, a quiet heart ready to open. The flame in Elle's hand flickered as though sensing the moment's gravity, and as it moved closer, the room held its breath, wrapped in the stillness of something holy. The candle, their candle, was about to awaken. The moment hovered in the air, soft, trembling, delicate as a single breath held between two hearts. Marin and Elle stood side by side before the candle they had shaped long ago, their shadows pooling together in the warm glow of the lantern resting nearby. The room felt impossibly quiet, as though even the candles on the surrounding shelves leaned in to witness what was about to unfold. Elle held the lit taper just above the unburned wick. The flame quivered, stretching toward the wax as if drawn by memory alone. A hush settled over the workshop, a hush so deep that Marin could hear the faint rhythm of Elle's breathing beside her, steady but threaded with emotion. "This is it," Elle whispered, "the moment we waited for." Marin nodded, voice soft as silk. "Let it burn for everything we lost, and everything we found again." Elle lowered the taper. The flame kissed the wick. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Only a tiny glow, a single thread of light trying to catch. Then, gently, the wick warmed. A soft flicker blossomed. The flame grew, steady and golden, rising with the quiet confidence of something that had waited years to breathe. Marin exhaled, the air leaving her lungs in a trembling rush. Elle let out a sound, half sigh, half laugh, full of relief and wonder. The candle was lit, and with it something inside both of them finally opened. The flame held a soft glow, warm but not glaring, bright but not demanding. It flickered in a gentle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat illuminated. Shadows danced gently across the walls, moving with the flame as though the room itself were sighing with long-sought peace. Marin stepped closer, her eyes shimmering in the candlelight. "Do you feel it?" she whispered. Elle nodded slowly. "It feels like coming home." A tear slid down Marin's cheek, not from sadness, but from a release so profound it could only take the shape of water. Elle reached forward, hesitating just before their fingers brushed her skin. When she didn't pull away, Elle gently wiped the tear with their thumb. "I didn't expect you would still want me in your life," Elle said softly. Marin's smile was small, luminous. "I didn't hold on for the person you were. I held on because I believed in the person you could become, and the path we could walk, if we ever found our way back to it." Elle's breath trembled. "And now that I'm here, now," she murmured, "we begin again, with honesty, with gentleness, with light." They stood in silence, watching the flame dance, steady, unwavering, carrying years of longing in its golden glow. Elle set the taper aside and let their fingers brush against Marin's hand. This time the touch was intentional, seeking, real. She turned her hand, interlacing her fingers with theirs, the flame reflected in their joined hands like a small sunrise. Elle looked around the workshop, eyes softening as they took in the shelves of candles, each one a moment, a memory, a promise. "You kept this place alive," they said, "even when things were hard." "I kept myself alive," Marin corrected gently. "This room helped." "The candles helped, but I learned how to tend to my own light too." "That's what I want to learn now," Elle said quietly. "How to tend to yours and to my own." Marin squeezed their hand, warmth blooming through her. "We can learn together." A gust of wind brushed softly against the cottage walls, rattling a few branches outside. But inside, the air was still and warm. The flame wavered only slightly, then steadied again, as if reassuring them that this beginning was strong enough to endure whatever winds might come next. Elle lifted the lantern her father had left behind and placed it beside the candle. Its panels caught the candlelight, glowing faintly from within. "Think it's ready to hold the flame again?" Elle asked. Marin nodded. "It's waited long enough." Together they lifted the lantern's small door. The candle's light spilled inside, bathing the interior in gold. It felt symbolic, one flame entering another vessel, merging past with present, inviting the future. When the lantern door closed, the room transformed. The candle's glow multiplied through the lantern's glass, casting a web of swirling patterns across the walls, patterns carved by her father, etched by time, now alive with light they had rekindled together. Elle inhaled deeply. "It feels like your father is here," Marin nodded, her voice catching gently. "It feels like everyone we lost is here, watching, approving." The flame steadied again, as if nodding in agreement. They stood there for a long time, the lantern between them, the candle burning in patient silence. Neither spoke, neither needed to. This was not just a flame, it was forgiveness, it was return, it was a beginning long overdue. When Marin finally spoke, her voice was no louder than a breath. "Tomorrow, we carry this lantern to the clearing." Elle nodded. "And let the valley see the light." Marin smiled. "Let it see that we came back to each other." Their hands joined again, warm and sure, and the lantern glowed brighter, as if celebrating the return of two souls who had wandered far, only to find their way home by the light of a single flame. Dawn arrived quietly, as though the sun itself wished not to disturb the fragile beauty of the night that had just passed. A soft silver-blue glow seeped through Marin's window, brushing the shelves of candles with the faintest hint of morning. The lantern, resting on the table beside the newly lit candle, caught the first threads of light and shimmered gently, its glass panels diffusing the glow into warm golden shapes along the wooden walls. Maren stirred, her breath deep and slow, rising from a sleep that had carried her through the calmest dream she'd known in years. The warmth of the candle's flame still lingered in the air, as though it had stood watch over her through the night. She opened her eyes to find Elle sitting peacefully in the room's quiet corner, wrapped in a soft wool cloak, hands resting in their lap. "You didn't sleep?" Maren asked, her voice soft as newly fallen snow. Elle smiled, lines around their eyes deepening gently. "I did, for a little while, but the morning, it felt too still to miss." Maren rose from her bed and walked to the table, where the candle burned with a steady flame, calm, unwavering, as if it had always belonged here. "It's beautiful in the morning light," she murmured. "It is," Elle agreed. "It feels like the valley is waking with us." Outside the cottage, the world stretched into a serene hush. Birds began their morning calls in soft, hesitant notes. Mist drifted along the lower ridge of the valley, catching pale sunlight, like strands of spun silver. The river's murmur floated faintly through an open window, steady, familiar, comforting. Maren poured warm water into a basin and washed her hands and face, savoring the chill that refreshed her senses. She handed a cloth to Elle, who accepted it with a grateful nod. Their movements were quiet, unhurried, as if they both understood that this morning was meant to unfold gently, without rush or expectation. When they stepped outside, the crisp morning air kissed their cheeks. Dew sparkled along the grass, transforming each blade into a tiny prism of light. The sky above was a soft watercolor of blues and peaches, painted with a calm hand. The lantern hung from Elle's hand, its weight no longer heavy but grounding, symbolic of the journey they had taken together and the light they carried now. Maren looked toward the ridge. "The clearing will be different in the morning," she said. "Quieter, more open." "Will you show me?" Elle asked. She nodded. "I'd like that." They walked side by side along the familiar path, the earth soft beneath their boots. Every step sent the scent of wet leaves rising, the forest still basking in the remnants of dawn. The world around them seemed to hum with quiet joy, gentle, unobtrusive, like a friend smiling from afar. When they reached the clearing, sunlight had begun filtering between the trees. The grass shimmered with dew, and the river reflected the pale sky in soft ripples. Everything felt peaceful, as though holding its breath for their arrival. Maren walked to the stone at the center of the clearing, the place where they had once carved their hopes, where they sat last night listening to the river's stories. In the morning light, the stone seemed almost luminous, warm with memory. Elle joined her, holding the lantern with both hands, as though it were something sacred. "Do you feel it?" Maren asked quietly. Elle closed their eyes, inhaling deeply. "Yes, the stillness, the peace, the way the valley holds us." Maren smiled. "It's always been like this, even when we were too young to understand it." They stood there for a long moment, letting the morning breeze ripple through their hair. A soft rustle swept through the trees, gentle, almost melodic, carrying the promise of a day meant for healing and quiet joy. Elle opened their eyes, gaze drifting across the clearing. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," they said. "Not just the valley, but the way mornings felt here, calm, honest." "You missed the parts of yourself that live here," Maren said softly. Elle looked at her then, their expression warm and full. I think you're right. They set the lantern on the stone and stood beside it, sharing the silence. Sunlight threaded through the glass panels, scattering soft golden shards across the stone surface. Marin lightly touched Elle's hand, not seeking, not asking, just offering quiet companionship. Elle turned their hand, interlacing their fingers with hers naturally, gently. The warmth of their joined hands blended with the morning light, settling deep into the space between them. It was enough, more than enough. A peaceful morning in a valley that had waited patiently for two wandering hearts to find rest. The morning unfolded with a softness that felt almost deliberate, as though the world wished to ease Marin and Elle into the new day with gentle hands. Sunlight poured slowly into the clearing, warming the tops of the grasses and casting long, graceful shadows beneath the trees. The river shimmered like a blade of light laid carefully along the valley floor. Marin released Elle's hand, only to brush her fingertips across the stone's sun-warmed surface. "It feels different in daylight," she murmured. "Everything does," Elle said, lifting the lantern so the sunlight passed through its glass panels. Golden patterns danced across the nearby tree trunks, soft and fleeting, like blessings whispered by the morning. They stood there together, letting the hush of the valley settle inside them. Nothing demanded their attention, no urgency pressed against their ribs. The world simply was, and allowed them to simply be. After a while, Marin nodded toward the path. "There's something I like to do every morning," she said, "if you want to join me." Elle smiled gently. "Lead the way." They walked along a narrow trail just beyond the clearing, where the forest thinned and a series of small herb gardens grew in tidy rows. Marin had tended them for years: lavender, mint, sage, chamomile, each plant holding a scent the valley had come to recognize as her own. "I remember these," Elle said, kneeling to brush a hand over the mint leaves. "You used to make teas for anyone who came to your door." "And salves," Marin laughed softly. "For Taran, every time he scraped himself climbing trees he had no business climbing." Elle smiled, their eyes brightening with warm amusement. "Some things never change." "Some things shouldn't," Marin replied, inhaling the gentle fragrance rising from the garden. She showed Elle how she clipped the morning herbs, never too much, always with gratitude. Elle followed her lead, their movements slower and more thoughtful than years before, as though they were relearning how to move in a place that asked them to be tender. Marin gathered the herbs into a small woven basket, each leaf a reminder of quiet rituals that had grounded her through her loneliest days. She glanced at Elle, who watched her with a soft expression, not pity, not sorrow, but a quiet admiration that warmed her chest. "You kept so much life here," Elle said, "even when I was gone." "I kept myself steady," Marin replied. "These gardens helped." "And now?" Elle asked. "Do they still feel the same?" Marin paused, considering the question. "They feel lighter now, as though the work isn't only mine anymore." Elle exhaled a small breath, half relief, half gratitude. "I'd like to help," they said quietly. "You already are," Marin told them. They continued gathering herbs until the basket rested comfortably full. Marin then guided Elle toward a small spot where several stones formed a semicircle, her morning sitting place, shaped over time by the quiet habit of reflection. "This is where I come to breathe," she said, settling herself onto one of the stones, "to let the day begin gently." Elle sat beside her, their cloak brushing lightly against her arm. "It's beautiful." "It's honest," Marin replied. Some mornings are heavy, some are bright, some are neither, but the valley always holds them. And now it holds us, Elle said softly. Marin felt her heart soften. Yes, it does. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the delicate fragrance of chamomile and lavender through the air. Birds flitted between branches overhead, their wings scattering tiny flecks of sunlight like laughter made visible. Elle tilted their face toward the sky. I forgot how quiet peace can be, they whispered. Not silent, but spacious. That's the valley's gift, Marin said. It gives back the space you didn't realize you lost. Elle's gaze drifted toward her. And you make the space feel safe. Marin met their eyes, warmth blooming in her chest. We make it safe, together. For a long while they sat in comfortable stillness. The world moved slowly around them in its morning rhythm, light deepening, shadows shifting, the river humming softly in the distance. Then Marin stood, brushing off her skirt. We should bring the herbs back to the cottage. The tea will help us welcome the day. Elle rose too, lifting the lantern with gentle hands. And after tea? Marin smiled faintly. After tea, we show the valley our light. The lantern glowed faintly in the sun, as though agreeing. Together they began walking along the path toward the cottage, step by slow step, basket and lantern swaying in quiet harmony. And the valley, ancient and attentive, gathered their peace like morning dew. Elle followed, setting the lantern upon the table where the candle still glowed with a steady, calm flame. It hasn't flickered once, Elle observed, admiring the candle with a soft smile. It's strong, Marin replied. It waited a long time to burn. She set the basket of herbs on the counter and began arranging them, separating mint from lavender, chamomile from sage. Elle watched her for a moment, the simple rhythm of her hands moving through a timeless dance of care and familiarity. Let me help, Elle said gently. Marin nodded, sliding a small wooden bowl toward them. Strip the chamomile heads into here, just the golden centers. They worked side by side, fingers brushing occasionally as they moved through the herbs. The small sounds, the rustle of leaves, the clink of pottery, the soft crackle of the candle's flame, wove themselves into a soothing music. You've always been gentle with your hands, Marin said softly, not looking up. Elle smiled, a warmth blooming in their eyes. And you've always noticed things no one else sees. It's easy to notice what you care for, she murmured. Elle paused for just a heartbeat, enough for the moment to settle, deep and meaningful, then continued their careful work. When the herbs were prepared, Marin heated water over the small iron stove. Steam soon filled the air, curling upward in slow, graceful ribbons. She added the chamomile and mint to a ceramic teapot, letting the fragrant blend steep as the warm scent spread gently through the cottage. Elle sat at the table, watching her with an expression of peaceful familiarity. I've missed this, they said softly. The calm of mornings here, the way time feels kinder. Marin poured the tea, its color a soft golden hue, and took a seat across from Elle. Time isn't kinder here, she said. We just move slower. We let it pass through us instead of around us. Elle wrapped their hands around the warm cup, savoring the comfort of its heat. "Maybe that's what I needed all along," they murmured. "Not to chase time, but to meet it gently." They sipped in silence for a few minutes, letting the warmth settle into their bones. Outside the window, sunlight drifted through the trees, casting moving patterns on the floor. The river's distant whisper threaded softly between their breaths. "This cottage feels alive," Elle said softly. "It is," Moran answered. "Every candle, every herb, every memory in these walls. They all hold pieces of the life I've lived. And now?" She paused, her voice warm with quiet hope. "Now they can hold pieces of yours again." Elle looked at her, emotion shimmering in their eyes. "Are you sure? After all these years?" Maren reached across the table and placed her hand gently over theirs. "The years didn't erase the place you held in my life. They simply reshaped it." Elle turned their hand palm up, intertwining their fingers with hers. "I want to fill it with something real," they said, "something steady." "We will," she replied, slowly, kindly. "Just like this tea." Elle laughed softly, a warm, easy laugh that felt like an echo of who they used to be, softened by who they had become. Maren smiled in return, feeling an ease settle between them like sunlight falling onto still water. When the tea was finished, Maren stood and lifted the lantern, now infused with both the candle's glow and morning light. "Shall we take it to the clearing today?" she asked. Elle rose beside her, eyes bright with recognition of the moment's significance. "Yes," they said, "let's show the valley the flame we carried back." They stepped outside together, lantern in hand, their shadows blending on the ground before them. The valley opened wide and welcoming, sunlight spilling across the hills in gentle waves. As they walked down the path, the lantern swayed between them, its soft glow flickering through the daylight, like a heart that had finally found its steady rhythm again. And the day, calm, open, spacious, unfolded before them with quiet promise. The sun had risen fully now, warm but gentle, casting the valley in a soft, honey-colored glow. Maren and Elle walked side by side along the familiar path, the lantern swaying lightly between them. Its golden patterns shimmered against the forest floor, even in daylight, a reminder that some lights did not compete with the sun, but simply added to its warmth. Birdsong filled the trees in delicate waves, drifting overhead like threads of melody woven into the air. The path ahead curved steadily, following the river's edge until opening once more into the clearing where so much of their story had unfolded. As they stepped into the space, it greeted them with the same quiet tenderness as before. Dew still sparkled in shaded pockets near the tree line. The stone at the center, worn but steady, waited beneath the soft touch of mid-morning light. Maren paused, letting the clearing breathe around her. "When I was alone," she said, her voice gentle, "I used to come here at this hour. The light always made me feel as though someone was listening." "I'm listening now," Elle replied. She turned to them with a soft smile. "I know." They approached the stone together. Elle set the lantern upon its flat surface, where the morning sun blended with the candle's soft glow. A delicate harmony formed, warm gold meeting steady flame, neither overwhelming the other. "It looks different here," Elle murmured, brushing their fingers lightly over the lantern's handle. "Brighter, whole." Maren nodded. "The clearing holds stories. It remembers what it witnesses. And it remembers this lantern. It remembers us." Elle smiled faintly. "Maybe it remembers us better than we remembered ourselves." For a moment they simply stood together, watching the flame through the lantern glass. Marin wandered her fingertips across the carved symbols glowing faintly on the candle inside. The spiral, the star, the river wave, softened but not erased by time. "It's beautiful in daylight," she whispered. "Because it's alive again," Elle said, their voice soft with awe. A gentle breeze stirred the clearing then, bending the grasses and rustling the trees. The lantern's flame flickered, but only briefly, before returning to its steady glow, stronger than the wind that tried to touch it. Marin took in a deep breath of earth and sunlight. "There's something I never told you," she said quietly. Elle turned to her attentive. "When the first frost came each year, I would light 3 candles. But on the mornings after, I always carried the unlit candle, the one we made here, just to remind myself of the path we shared." Elle's gaze softened, filling with tenderness. "I wish I had known. I wish I could have done something to ease those mornings." "You're easing them now," she said gently, "by being here." Elle exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of heaviness. "Then let me ease every morning ahead in whatever way I can." Marin's chest warmed at the sincerity in their tone. "We walk it together," she reminded them softly. Together they lifted the lantern from the stone and walked a slow circle around the clearing, a quiet ritual neither had spoken aloud, but both instinctively understood. The flame cast a gentle glow onto grass and stone, as though blessing the path they traced. When they returned to the center, Elle set the lantern down once more, letting it rest in the same place where their hopes had once begun. "A morning like this," Elle murmured, gazing at the flame, "makes the whole world feel gentle." Marin nodded. "Because we're meeting it gently." They sat beside the stone, leaning into one another with a quiet certainty. A pair of finches fluttered overhead and settled on a nearby branch, singing a delicate melody that wove easily through the warm stillness. For a long time they watched the light together. No words, no need for explanations, only presence. Eventually, Marin's head found a resting place against Elle's shoulder, soft, natural, without thought. Elle's breath deepened, steady and calm, and their hand covered hers with instinctive warmth. In that stillness, surrounded by trees that had known their laughter and their silence, by a river that had carried their echoes and their promises, they felt the valley settle around them like a sigh of relief. It was not a triumphant moment, not grand, not loud, but it was whole, and it was theirs. The valley eased slowly toward midday, but the light still held the softness of morning. Sunbeams sifted through the canopy above, touching the clearing in thin, warm ribbons. The breeze was barely there, just enough to stir the grasses and carry the river's quiet hum toward Marin and Elle as they sat together beside the stone. Time in this gentle hour did not feel like something that passed. It felt like something that rested with them. Marin leaned comfortably against Elle's shoulder, feeling the slow rhythm of their breathing, unhurried, steady, grounding. Leah's hand remained around hers, thumb brushing occasionally in a way that said, "I'm here," without needing any words to soften it. "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" Elle asked softly, not shifting their gaze from the lantern's flame. Marin considered the question without hurry. "Sometimes," she said. "But then I remember that different doesn't always mean better. It just means unexplored." Elle nodded gently. "I used to imagine dozens of futures for us, some far away, some right here, and yet..." They paused, breathing the quiet in. None of them felt as peaceful as this moment. Marin smiled, tilting her face toward the sun-warmed air. Because this one is real. A long silence followed, unbroken, comfortable, like a shared dream unfolding around them. The lantern's flame glowed in soft gold, scattering subtle shapes across the stone. They watched its quiet dance, the way it shifted, but never faltered. Finally, Marin straightened slightly. "There's something I haven't done in years," she said, "and I think maybe it's time." Elle looked at her with gentle curiosity. "What is it?" "Listening," she replied, placing her hand over her heart. "Truly listening. Not to memories, not to fear, but to now." Elle breathed in softly, understanding almost immediately. "Then let's listen together." They closed their eyes. The world deepened. They heard the slow curl of the breeze weaving through the tall grasses, the soft whisper of leaves shifting overhead, the rhythmic, patient song of the river moving over stones, birds trilling in small, delicate bursts. And beneath all of it, the quiet thrum of the valley, the stillness that had always existed, waiting for them to return to it with open hearts. Marin felt peace spill through her like warm light, loosening the last small knots inside her chest. She felt Elle's presence beside her, not urgent, not seeking, simply there, simply steady. When she opened her eyes, Elle was watching her with an expression that carried years of understanding. "It's different," Marin said softly. "What is?" Elle asked. "Hearing the valley with someone again?" Elle's lips curved subtly. "I used to imagine how it would be to sit with you like this. Not as the children we were, not as the uncertain people we became, but as two souls who made their way back." Marin's eyes softened. "And how did you imagine it?" "Peaceful," Elle said, "but not this peaceful, not this whole." A warmth bloomed inside her, gentle and quiet. "I'm glad." They sat there until the sun shifted slightly overhead, warming their faces. The shadows around them softened, stretching in long, easy lines across the clearing. Then Elle spoke again, voice low and thoughtful. "Marin, there's something I've carried for a long time, a question I never asked." She turned to them, attentive. "Ask it." Elle hesitated, not from fear, but from respect for the moment. "Do you ever wish," they said slowly, "that I had stayed, that we had lived our years side by side instead of apart?" Marin clasped both hands gently around Elle's. "If you had stayed," she said, "we might never have become who we are now. And maybe we wouldn't have understood the value of this moment." Elle nodded, a quiet emotion shimmering in their eyes. "So you don't regret the paths we walked?" "Regret?" Marin shook her head softly. "No, I only grieved the silence, but not our paths. They led us back here." Her words settled gently between them, warm as the sunlight touching their hair. "And you?" she added softly. "Do you wish things had been different?" Elle looked at her with an honesty that felt like the clearing itself had spoken through them. "Only that I had returned sooner," they said. "Not instead of the journey, but before the loneliness became part of your morning rituals." Marin smiled, brushing her thumb softly over their hand. "Loneliness taught me how to welcome company again, and it taught me to see the quiet differently, not as emptiness, but as space." "And now?" Elle asked. "Now," she said, "that space is full." The breeze swept gently across the clearing, carrying the warmth of sunlight and the softness of their truth. Together they turned back toward the lantern, the heart of their shared past and their chosen future. The flame shimmered inside, steady and calm, reflecting in both their eyes as if blessing the moment. Marin rested her head once more on Elle's shoulder. Elle leaned theirs gently against hers. The day stretched open before them, quiet, bright, and full of breath. And the hours between morning and noon held them gently, as if the world itself were content to let them rest in this rediscovered peace. The day ripened slowly, warming the valley with a gentle golden light that never felt harsh. Marin and Elle remained in the clearing for a while longer, held by the soft glow of the lantern and the easy rhythm of the river. But eventually Marin rose, brushing stray blades of grass from her skirt. "There's another place I want to visit," she said quietly. "A place I go to when I need clarity." Elle stood as well, lifting the lantern with careful hands. "I'll go anywhere with you," they replied, not as a promise, but as a simple truth. Marin led them along a small footpath branching off from the clearing. The path curved gently between tall ferns and clusters of white wildflowers, their petals trembling in the sunlight. Each step felt soft beneath their boots, the earth cushioned with the remnants of last year's fallen leaves. "It's a quiet path," Elle observed. "It's meant to be," Marin said. "It helps you hear things you didn't know were inside you." Elle tilted their head thoughtfully. "It's already working." Marin's smile was faint but warm. It always does. They walked without hurry, letting the day unfold around them. Birds hopped between branches, their wings catching flecks of sunlight. A small squirrel darted across the path and paused long enough to inspect them with bright, curious eyes before disappearing into the underbrush. The forest here felt different, more intimate, as though the trees leaned closer, not out of expectation, but companionship. Marin's voice broke the quiet in a soft whisper. "When I was alone, I often walked this very path. I would imagine you walking it too, somewhere far away, not knowing it was the same path guiding us both." Elle's steps slowed. "I think I did walk paths like this," they said. "Quiet ones, ones where the world felt still enough for me to hear my own heart." "And what did it say?" Marin asked gently. "That it missed a place it wasn't sure it could return to," Elle replied, "and a person it hoped hadn't forgotten." Marin's eyes softened. "I never forgot, not for a day." Elle nodded, the truth settling softly into their chest, warm and steady. They continued walking until the trees parted, revealing a small overlook where the valley opened below. The river traced a shining path through the fields, curving toward distant hills. The village rooftops peeked through the treetops, tiny, peaceful, tucked into the world like a storybook scene. Elle inhaled deeply, their eyes widening with quiet wonder. "I forgot how beautiful it is from here." "This is where I come," Marin said, "when the world feels too loud. Nothing speaks here unless you ask it to." Elle stepped to her side, lantern in hand. "Then let's ask it nothing," they murmured. "Just listen." They stood shoulder to shoulder, gazing out across the valley. The warm breeze carried the scent of pine and sun-warmed grass. The world felt vast yet gentle, as though it existed in soft focus just for them. Elle set the lantern on a flat stone nearby, letting the wind brush lightly against its glass panels. Inside, the flame flickered with calm certainty, steady, patient, alive. "I want to learn this piece," Elle said quietly. "I want to let it shape who I become next." Marin turned to them. "It already is." Elle lowered their gaze, humbled by the thought. "And you? What do you want now, Marin?" She took a slow breath, letting the valley settle inside her. "To share my quiet with someone who understands it. To wake knowing the day isn't empty, not because someone fills it, but because someone walks it with me." Elle's throat tightened gently. "I can walk with you," they whispered. "And rest with me," Marin added, "and listen with me, and learn with you," Elle finished softly. The breeze lifted her hair slightly, brushing it across her cheek. Elle reached out instinctively, tucking the loose strand behind her ear in a gesture so gentle it felt like it had been carved from memory. Their fingertips lingered for a moment longer than necessary. Marin did not step away. She placed her hand over Elle's, steady and warm. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's enough." Elle's breath trembled, but with softness, not sorrow. "I'm here," they repeated, "and I'm not leaving." They turned back toward the valley, allowing the moment to deepen without breaking its quiet magic. The landscape stretched before them in warm, endless hues of sunlight and shadow, alive, serene, whole. At their feet, the lantern glowed softly. The flame inside did not waver. The path they walked, both the one beneath their boots and the one unfolding inside them, felt certain, gentle, and right. Together, they began the slow walk back, footsteps soft on the earth, the valley's peace following close behind. The sun drifted past its highest point, settling into a warm, mellow glow that bathed the valley in the soft light of early afternoon. Marin and Elle walked side by side along the winding trail, the lantern keeping pace with them, its gentle flame steady even as the breeze played through the trees. As the narrow path opened into a broader stretch of meadow, the valley revealed itself in fuller color, golden grasses swaying like a slow-moving sea, clusters of wildflowers dotting the landscape in shades of lavender, white, and soft blush. High above, a pair of hawks circled lazily, wings gliding on invisible currents. Elle slowed their steps, taking in the scene with a quiet wonder. "I don't remember it being this peaceful." "It always was," Marin said, "but peace is easier to notice when your heart is ready to receive it." Elle nodded, as though tasting the truth of that. "I wasn't ready before. I didn't know how to stop wandering." "And now?" she asked gently. "Now," Elle said, "I want to wander only in ways that bring me home." A warm softness unfurled in Marin's chest, like sunlight settling through leaves. She reached out, brushing her fingertips lightly against Elle's hand. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a gesture seeking anything in return. It was simply connection, quiet, present, honest. Elle threaded their fingers through hers, and together they continued walking. They passed the meadow and moved into a patch of old orchard trees, twisted trunks rising from soft moss, their branches stretching wide with memories of seasons past. The fruit had not yet ripened, but small green buds dotted the branches, promising sweetness in the days to come. "I used to play here," Marin said, releasing Elle's hand long enough to run her fingers along the bark of an apple tree. "My father taught me how to graft branches. My mother taught me how to listen to what the trees needed." "You've always known how to read what lives quietly," Elle murmured. Marin turned with a soft smile. "Quiet things speak the loudest once you know how to hear them." As they walked deeper into the orchard, they came across a wooden bench her father had built many years ago. The wood was smooth from age, its surface warmed by the sun. Marin motioned toward it. "Let's sit for a moment," she said. "This spot holds good memories." They settled on the bench, the lantern resting on the ground beside them. Its flame glowed faintly even in daylight, casting miniature reflections on the polished roots of the nearest tree. For a while, neither spoke. The orchard rustled with soft life, the buzzing of distant bees, the gentle flutter of leaves overhead, the hum of the valley breathing in the warm quiet. Elle's voice finally broke the silence, low and thoughtful. "It's strange," they said. "On all my travels, I found beauty, vast landscapes, tall cities, mountains that scraped the sky, oceans that swallowed the horizon, but not one place, not one, ever felt like this." Marin turned her gaze toward them. "Like home?" Elle nodded slowly. "Like a place that doesn't just hold your body, but holds your soul." She placed her hand over theirs again. "This valley knew you before the world did," Marin said. "It doesn't forget easily." Elle's eyes softened. "And you remembered me even when I was trying to forget myself." Marin shook her head gently. "You were never forgotten. Not by the valley, not by me. You were simply becoming." Elle's breath hitched slightly, not from sorrow, but from the release of a truth they had never let themselves hold. "Becoming what?" they asked quietly. "Someone who could return," Marin said, "and stay." The orchard basked in the warm hush of afternoon, light shifting through the leaves in patterns that danced softly across the bench and their joined hands. The moment felt unhurried, grounded, wrapped in the valley's slow heartbeat. Elle leaned back slightly, letting the sunlight touch their face. "I'd like to relearn everything with you," they murmured. "Not to replace the past, just to grow something new beside it." Marin felt her heart settle into a peaceful rhythm. "We will," she said. "We already are." They remained in the orchard until the warmth of the afternoon began to soften into the cool promise of approaching evening. The sky shifted slightly, bright gold mellowing into pale amber. The world around them breathed in long, slow patterns, steady, content, whole. At last Marin rose and lifted the lantern. "Let's return to the cottage," she said. "The evening will be beautiful." Elle stood beside her, brushing their hand gently along hers as they began to walk. "Every hour here feels like a gift," they said softly. "It is," Marin replied, "and we're learning how to receive it together." They made their way back through the orchard, lantern glowing quietly in Marin's hand, their footsteps soft as the valley welcomed them deeper into its calm embrace. By the time Marin and Elle reached the cottage, the day had begun its slow descent into evening. The sunlight mellowed into a softer gold that slid gently across the valley, and the shadows of the trees stretched long and graceful across the ground. A faint coolness drifted through the air, an early whisper of the night to come. They stepped inside the cottage, and the lantern's glow found its harmony with the dimming light, offering a warm, steady counterpoint to the world settling outside. Marin placed the lantern on the center table, where it illuminated the faint carvings along its wooden frame. The candle inside still burned with a patient flame, unwavering, as though it had an endless reservoir of calm to give. Elle loosened their cloak and set it over the back of a wooden chair. "It's quiet here," they said, voice soft. "Quieter than anywhere I've been in years." Marin moved about the cottage in gentle motions, removing the herbs from the basket, setting a kettle over the stove, drawing the curtains half closed to soften the evening light. "Quiet is a gift," she replied. "Sometimes we forget how precious it is." Elle watched her with a stillness shaped by admiration rather than longing. "You've managed to weave peace into every part of your life," they said. Marin shook her head softly. "Peace isn't something you weave once, it's something you tend to, like a garden." "And you kept tending," Elle murmured, "even when your heart was aching." She paused then, her hand resting on the kettle's handle, and turned to face them. "I tended because it's how I learned to breathe again, and now you're here. Not to replace that peace, but to share it." A warm expression flickered across Elle's face, something like gratitude mingled with the quiet recognition of being welcomed without condition. "Let me help with the evening tea," Elle offered. Marin stepped aside, handing them a sprig of lavender and a small wooden bowl. They worked together in easy silence, breaking apart the purple buds, letting their fragrance rise into the air. Elle added chamomile flowers while Marin sliced thin curls of dried ginger to mix in. The cottage filled with a tender scent, floral, earthy, warm, an embrace in its own right. When the tea was ready, they carried their cups to the small bench just outside the cottage, overlooking the valley. The sun hovered low, painting the river in shades of rose and silver. Myron took a slow sip, savoring the warmth along her tongue. Elle held their cup in both hands, eyes watching the sky's shifting colors with a peaceful reverence. "Do you remember," Elle said softly, "the nights we used to sit by the river as children? We would stay awake as long as we could just to see the stars come out." Marin smiled. "You'd point to each one and try to give it a name." "I thought naming them made them ours," Elle said with a quiet laugh. "And I told you the stars aren't ours to keep." "You did," Elle said, "but I still tried." Marin's gaze softened. "Some things we didn't need to keep, they kept us." Elle lowered their eyes to the lantern beside them, where the flame shone steady despite the shifting breeze. "Like this light." "Exactly," Marin said. The wind brushed gently against their faces, carrying the scents of pine and cooling leaves. Small fireflies had begun to blink into existence around the cottage, drifting in slow, floating arcs that echoed the first evening stars appearing overhead. Elle leaned back slightly, letting the moment stretch. "There's something comforting," they murmured, "about ending the day like this, quietly, without needing to fill every silence." "That's what true companionship feels like," Marin said quietly. "A silence that doesn't ask anything of you." Elle turned to her then, slowly, deliberately. "And that's what I want to offer you now. Not excitement or adventure or constant motion, but steadiness, presence, a place for your breath to rest." Marin let the warmth of his words settle deep in her chest. She placed her hand gently on Elle's arm. "And I'll offer you the same, a place to return to when your spirit needs gentleness." The sky deepened into richer shades of violet and indigo. Stars appeared like tiny echoes of the lantern's flame, scattered across the wide quiet above. Elle drew in a long breath. "I can't remember the last time I felt this still," they murmured. "Stillness can be a home, too," Marin whispered. The lantern glowed beside them, unwavering. Eventually, Marin rose and extended a hand. "Let's light the hearth inside. The evening will grow cooler soon." Elle took her hand, standing with her in a single, flowing motion. "Lead the way." Inside the cottage, they moved with the calm assurance of people who no longer needed to question their place beside one another. Marin added a few logs to the small stone hearth and struck a flame. The fire caught slowly, casting warm, golden light along the walls. Elle watched her in the firelight, soft shadows drawing gentle lines across her face, then looked toward the lantern on the table. "This place," Elle said quietly, "feels as though it waited for me." "It did," Marin replied, "and so did I." They sat together before the hearth, listening to the fire crackle, and the wind touched the window panes with soft fingertips. Evening drifted closer, wrapping the valley in a peaceful hush. And inside the small cottage, two hearts found warmth not just in the fire, but in the quiet presence of one another. Night arrived slowly, as though careful not to disturb the fragile peace that had blossomed inside the cottage. The fire in the hearth crackled with a soft, steady rhythm, spreading warmth across the room in sleepy waves. Shadows danced lazily along the wooden walls, their movements unhurried, like drifting leaves caught in a mild breeze. Marin and Elle sat close on the floor cushions in front of the hearth, their shoulders nearly touching. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The quiet felt full, rich with unspoken understanding, shaped by a day of walking, remembering, and rediscovering the kind of peace that only comes from being exactly where one is meant to be. Marin's fingers played gently at the hem of her sleeve, relaxed, thoughtful. Elle watched the fire, hands folded loosely in their lap, their posture at ease in a way Marin had not seen in many years. "It feels strange," Elle murmured at last, voice soft as warm ash. "What does?" Marin asked, leaning slightly closer. "To feel so settled," Elle said, "as though something inside me that wandered for so long finally decided to rest." Marin let her gaze soften on the fire. "Our rest doesn't mean the journey ends," she said. "It means you've found a place where you don't need to run." Elle nodded gently. "I've been thinking about that. And I think I want to build a life here again, not the life I left, a new one." Marin turned her head toward them, searching their expression. "You're certain?" "Yes," Elle replied, their voice steady, woven with quiet conviction. "I didn't know it until today, until this morning in the clearing, until the orchard, until sitting here by this fire. Everything feels right. Familiar, but new." Marin's heart warmed with a quiet joy, like the slow blooming of a flower at dusk. "Then we'll build something new," she said, her voice like a gentle flame. "Together." Elle smiled, small, peaceful, touched with gratitude. "Thank you for not closing your door to me," they whispered. Marin reached out, her hand resting lightly on Elle's. "The door was never closed," she said, "only waiting." Elle's fingers turned beneath hers, intertwining with a tenderness that carried no urgency, only steady presence. Their hands rested between them like a shared promise made in silence. The lantern burned softly on the table, its flame a warm echo of the firelight. Patterns of light rippled across the room, brushing the walls, the shelves of candles, the wooden beams overhead. Everything felt held. By the glow, by the valley, by the quiet unfolding between two people who had learned the long, gentle art of returning. After a moment, Marin stood and moved to one of the shelves. She selected a small candle she had made the previous winter, simple, white, and wrapped with a ribbon of soft gray wool. "What's this one for?" Elle asked softly as she returned. Marin sat beside them. "I call it the night's breath candle," she said. "I light one whenever I want the night to feel comforting, so the house feels like it's breathing with me." Elle smiled at the name. "May I light it?" Marin nodded, handing it to them. "Of course." Elle lifted the candle carefully, bringing it close to the lantern's flame. With slow, deliberate motions, they touched the wick to the glowing light. It caught almost instantly, blooming into a soft flame that danced with the calm rhythm of the evening. As Elle set the candle beside the hearth, Marin spoke gently. "Every flame in this house has its own story. Tonight, you added one. And I hope," Elle said, sitting back down, "that many more will burn beside it." They both settled again into the cushions, the soft glow of the candles merging with the firelight, until the whole cottage felt wrapped in gold. Outside, the valley was quiet, the trees standing dark and tall under a sky filled with stars. The river whispered its ongoing lullaby, steady and soothing. Fireflies drifted past the windows in gentle arcs, tiny lights that echoed the warmth indoors. Maren let her shoulder rest against Elle's, a closeness that felt natural, earned, and free of hesitation. Elle's breath deepened, settling into a steady rhythm that matched hers. "This feels like the first calm night I've had in years," Elle whispered. "Then let it be the first of many," Maren replied softly. Night settled deeper around them, not heavy, not lonely, but soft and full, like a blanket woven from stillness itself. And inside the small cottage, two hearts rested in the glow of flame and quiet company, letting the night carry them gently toward whatever dawn would bring. Morning drifted into being with the faintest blush of color, soft pinks and muted golds brushing the horizon. The cottage lay quiet beneath the waking sky, wrapped in the hush of a world not yet fully risen. Inside, the candle in the lantern had burned through the night with unwavering calm, its flame now a small glowing ember resting in the heart of the wax. Maren stirred first. She rose slowly, letting the gentle light of dawn pool across her face, before she stood and crossed the room. Elle lay sleeping peacefully near the hearth, the steady rhythm of their breath rising and falling under a warm, woven blanket. The quiet around them felt sacred, an exhale held by the valley itself. Maren touched the lantern gently. The ember inside glowed in response, as though acknowledging the hand that had shaped it long ago. She smiled, brushing her fingers along the carved wood one last time before lifting the lantern and carrying it outside. The valley greeted her with soft air and brighter sky. Dew shimmered across the fields. The river murmured its low morning song, and a pair of birds glided overhead, their shadows sweeping gracefully across the grass. The world felt tender and new. Elle stepped out moments later, cloak draped around their shoulders, eyes soft with sleep, but brightening as they saw her. "You woke before me," they said, voice warm and still drowsy. "I wanted to see the lantern in the morning light," Maren replied. "It carried us through the night. It deserves the dawn." Elle stepped beside her, looking into the clearing where sunlight stretched across the valley floor like a quiet promise. "It's beautiful," they whispered. "Everything feels settled. Like the valley is beginning again with us," Maren nodded. "Because we're beginning again." They stood together on the cottage step, watching. As the sun rose fully, slow, certain, gentle, painting the world in soft radiance, the light touched the lantern's fading ember, and in that small spark they saw not an ending, but a beginning shaped by all the quiet steps and softened memories that led them here. Elle took Maren's hand, intertwining their fingers with a steadiness that held no fear, no haste, only presence. "What now?" Elle asked. Maren breathed deeply, letting the morning fill her. "Now," she said softly, "we live, we learn, we share our days. And when evening comes again, we light a new candle, not because we're waiting, but because we're here." Elle nodded, eyes warm. Together they walked into the clearing where the valley opened wide, inviting the warmth of their steps. The world shimmered around them, grass bending under light, the river catching the sun like scattered jewels, the trees whispering in voices shaped by centuries. And in that peaceful place, Maren and Elle knew with quiet certainty that this was not the ending of their journey, only the first calm chapter of everything still waiting to unfold. The valley held their story gently. The lantern held their memory faithfully. and the morning carried them forward with a light belonging not to the past, but to tomorrow. Thank you, dear listener, for walking this quiet path with us tonight. May the calm of the valley linger softly in your thoughts. May the steady flame of the lantern warm your dreams, and may every breath you take lead you gently toward rest. If this story brought you peace, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us where you are listening from, whether the U.S., Europe, Canada, Asia, or somewhere far beyond, and what hour of night keeps you company. For now, let your eyes grow heavy. Let the world soften around you, and drift into a sleep as peaceful as a candle's quiet flame. Good night, and thank you for being here.